Okay, good evening everybody. I'll just give you a moment to take your seats, anybody that's not seated yet. Okay, look, we'll start. Welcome everybody and good evening to you all. My name is Pat Clark. I'm the Regional Manager for the Galway Clare Advisory Region, and you're very welcome to the Beef Conference for 2022. It's the first in-person conference since pre-COVID, since 2019. Unfortunately, weather conditions aren't very favourable for people travelling today, but we have what we have at this moment, and we'll get on with the proceedings. So the conference today there'll be two sessions. The first session will be key enablers to improving farm profitability. It'll be chaired by Trevor Boland to my right here, and there are 4 speakers. So Trevor will introduce each speaker as they start their presentations. The second session will be in relation to farm sustainability, and it'll be an open discussion with a number of key industry people, and it'll be chaired by Matt O'Keefe, who's here to my left. So Matt will facilitate that session afterwards. There are some refreshments after the second session, so sometime between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, so when you're finished you'll be able to avail of those. Our director from Teagasc, Frank O'Mara, will open the conference in just a few moments, and then he will hand over to Trevor for the first session, so I won't delay any further. But maybe before I do, I just want to make a comment, is that in Teagasc, in the Roscommon region, this last week, we lost a colleague. Finola Finn passed away last Wednesday, and Finola in the Roscommon office and also in the Ballinasloe office worked with farmers in that hinterland for a long number of years. So anybody of you who are from the Roscommon region or even the Ballinasloe region will probably remember Finola. So she passed away last week, and she was laid to rest today. And I would like to have just a moment's silence for Finola. So maybe if you could stand for just 1 moment. Okay, and may she rest in peace. Amen. Okay, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our director, Dr. Professor Frank O'Mara, who will open the conference and then pass on to the chairperson of the first session.
Thanks very much, Pat, and good evening, everybody. And look, I'm delighted to be over here in Ballinasloe for our National Beef Conference. As Pat said, it's the first face-to-face conference we've had in several years, and look, isn't it great that I suppose the idea of having to put conferences on virtually is kind of not quite a thing in the past, but something that we don't have to do as a necessity. So look, it's been I suppose a very unusual year. We've got about 2.5 to 3 weeks left in the year, and you know, probably 2022 will be, when we look back on it, it'll certainly be dominated by the war in Ukraine. And for the farming community, that war obviously had a huge impact on farming here in Ireland. You know, it's a long way off to Ukraine, but it just shows how connected the whole, I suppose, agricultural system is around the world. And look, you're well aware of the huge impact that war had on input prices, which were already rising, you know, quite a bit towards the back end of 2021. We were seeing fertiliser prices rising a lot. But with the war, we saw a huge escalation in the price of fertiliser and fuel indeed, and feed. And you know, to levels that we had never probably seen before. So very unusual year in relation to that. And luckily, in the prices for agricultural products generally went up as well. And I suppose, you know, this morning we published our estimates for incomes in 2022 this year, and our forecast for 2023. And you know, without going over it in detail, the story in beef can really be summarised as the high input prices just about compensated for the high product prices, and the high beef prices just about compensated for the increases that we had in input costs. And I suppose looking forward to 2023, we see the effect of those high input prices continuing on into 2023. It might moderate a bit as the year goes on, but I suppose we also expect beef prices to remain strong for 2023, and I suppose we don't see huge change, some little ups and some little downs in terms of what we might see in beef farm incomes. But look, I'll come back to that a little bit maybe before I finish. I suppose other things about 2022 was obviously a very good year for grass growth, and I think that was a great help, particularly probably in the west, northwest and southwest. Over in the east and the southeast, we probably had too dry a summer, and that did have an impact on grass growth. But for the rest of the country, it was an excellent year for grass growth. So that obviously was a big help this year as well. The other thing that's the couple of big things I suppose that have happened or are happening. We've just completed the first tranche of applications to the acre scheme, which obviously a lot of beef farmers would have been interested in, and I think in the country as a whole over 40,000 applications have been submitted. In Teagasc, we on behalf of our clients submitted over 12,000 applications, and a huge job of work done to complete that work in a very short period. And look, acres is going to be a very important scheme, I think, for farmer incomes for the coming years. We have the organic scheme just closing now as well, and a much bigger level of interest in that than we've seen in previous schemes, obviously because of the increased payment rates in that. And what's coming down the corner, and we had a small bit of information on it this morning, but it's not news to you, but we have the new Common Agricultural Policy coming into effect in 2023. And that is going to have impact on the distribution, or how the payments in Pillar 1, in other words your basic payment as it's currently called, soon to be called the BIS, Basic Income Support Scheme, how that is distributed. And the beef sector is one of the areas where actually there will be quite a bit of distribution, quite a lot of winners and quite a lot of losers. And I suppose when I say losers, maybe the amounts aren't huge, but still I suppose in a sector that's challenged, any movement of your income is significant. And so that's another big thing that we have coming ahead for us in 2023. So I suppose, look, that's the backdrop, I suppose, and the whole policy scene around our industry, which is the backdrop to this conference, which has the title of Profitable Pathways to Sustainable Beef Farming. And for us, sustainability is a word we use a lot. It's used by everybody a lot. For us, it means three things, or there's three parts to sustainability. There's economic sustainability, there's environmental sustainability, and there's social sustainability. And I suppose you can't have any one without the other two. Each are equally important, but I think at the end of the day, economic sustainability has to be the one that is the first one, I suppose, that you as farmers and us as an organisation that supports you is concerned with. And our job in Teagasc is to develop the technologies and the systems of production that will be as sustainable as possible in all its dimensions, profitable, environmentally sustainable, and then to help farmers to adopt those systems. And I talked a little earlier about the profit, and we all know that the average profit on beef farms is quite low. We were talking today about the profit on cattle rearing systems, which is your typical suckler cow system being less than 10,000, the farm income. So quite a low figure on average. But I suppose an average hides a multitude. And if you dig into those figures, you actually see that the top performers, the top 20% or top 25% of performers, actually they do have a decent income from their farming activity. And what that comes down to is using best practice in relation to the technologies, and your management system being as good as you can, and making use of the resources, the natural resources that you have on your farm. So even though we might say that, look, beef farming is low income, there still is a huge role for technology and for doing things right, doing the best you can in relation to your farm. And that's what Teagasc is about. We're here to, I suppose, point the way in relation to what help we can give you to do things right on your farm. And the conference will very much touch on that tonight. I suppose the environmental part of sustainability is getting a huge amount of attention in the last couple of years, both from things like water quality, but particularly climate change. And you know, there's a lot of talk in the last couple of weeks in relation to how the greenhouse gas emission targets that we have are going to impact on the beef sector. And we've, you know, the report of the Food Vision Beef and Sheep Group, which was released about 2 weeks ago, or sent to the Minister about 2 weeks ago, and you know, there's talks, there's proposals there that we need schemes to support farmers who want to exit suckler production or want to reduce the numbers of cows that they have. And look, I don't know whether those schemes are going to be brought in or not by the government. That's a policy decision. But I suppose our job remains the same, I think, regardless. It's to those farmers that want to continue in suckler farming or in dairy beef farming, you know, to help them to do that job as good as they can. We're very focused on trying to get our greenhouse gas emissions in agriculture under control, because it's in the law now that, you know, the country has committed to a reduction in greenhouse gases of 51%, and the fact that it's in the law gives it real teeth. So it's not something that we can ignore or hope will go away, or that somebody else will do the heavy lifting. I think for the agriculture sector, our target is to reduce emissions by 25%. So we're doing a lot in terms of trying to help the sector to achieve that target with minimal disruption. And I suppose there's two parts to our job. One is to develop the technologies that will reduce emissions, and you know, we talk a lot about things, you'll probably hear us going on about them a lot, like protected urea or low emission slurry spreading, or using clover to reduce your nitrogen, or slaughtering your cattle at a younger age, and so on. And that's our job, is to develop those technologies so that they're available for farmers to use, and we know that they will help to reduce emissions. And the second job we have then is helping you to adopt those technologies on your farms. And you know, we have a programme called the Signpost Programme, which is our main programme to help farmers do that. And there's two parts of that are relevant to beef farmers. We have a programme called Future Beef, which is about supporting suckler farmers to go on that journey of reducing emissions while remaining profitable. And we have Dairy Beef 500, which we actually launched here today, which is supporting dairy calf beef farmers go on the same road of reducing emissions while remaining slaughter. And that's a very big priority for us to do that. And we actually launched a new strategy around what Teagasc will do to support farmers and climate last week. And there's three elements to that. First, there's a new advisory support programme for farmers who want to put together a plan to reduce their emissions on their farm, or your emissions on your farm. That's a new programme we have. It's going to be a freely available service to both Teagasc clients and non-Teagasc clients. And you'll see on your chairs there's a little leaflet that allows you or gives you the details for signing up to that programme, and we'd encourage you to do that. We would hope to reach out to over 50,000 farmers by the end of the decade in relation to that programme. So a key element of it will be for you as an individual that enters the programme. We'll benchmark your current emissions and your carbon sequestration, and we'll develop a plan with you as to what you can do on your farm that makes sense for you to reduce those emissions or increase that sequestration. The second thing we're doing is developing a new tool with ICBF and Board BIA to allow us to do all that calculating. It's called, currently we'll have to get a better name for it, but it's a Sustainability Digital Planner. And that's the tool our advisors will use with you if we're making out any of those plans with you. And the third strand of our strategy is to increase our research in this area, because we don't have enough technologies to reach the 25% target as we stand. So we do need to develop more technologies. So we're establishing a new virtual research centre. By virtual we mean it's not bricks and mortar, it's about people, and bringing the people right across our organisation and indeed in other organisations that work in this area together, and putting more people into that team so that we can increase the pace at which we're developing solutions for greenhouse gas emissions. So that's probably all I wanted to say by way of introduction. You know, that our conference is dealing with those themes of profitability and environmental sustainability. Obviously, we're always trying to find the win-wins, things that improve both economic and environmental sustainability at the same time. It's not always possible to do that. Sometimes it's just a win in one and no change in the other, or whatever. But you'll hear more about that tonight. Look, I think it is going to be a very interesting programme, and I'm certainly looking forward to the speakers. So I'm going to hand over now to Trevor Boland, who's going to chair the first session. Trevor is a farmer from County Sligo, and he's actually one of the farmers in that future beef programme that I mentioned. He's a suckler farmer, so his farm is one of these demonstration farms that we use in relation to demonstrating best practice, and he's also a member of the Teagasc Beef Stakeholder Group. So Trevor, we're delighted that you're agreed to come along here and chair this first session, and I'll hand over to you now to steer it from here.
Thanks very much, Frank. You're all very welcome here, and what's a cold night to come out, but it shows the interest in beef farming, particularly in this region. We have a crowd here tonight. So I hope you get great information from. We have 4 great speakers coming up, and I find when I go to a conference like this, if I can bring home 3 or 4 pointers I can use on my own farm, and to help the future of that farm, the profitability of that farm into the future, it'll be a worthwhile night for all. So our 4 speakers tonight are Paul Crossan, is the Beef Enterprise Leader in Teagasc Grange. We have Natasha Mune, who's the Programme Manager of Beef Health Check in Animal Health Ireland. We have Colin Byrne, who is a beef researcher in Teagasc Grange, and we have Nicky Byrne, who is also a beef researcher in Teagasc Grange. And then we have 2 farmers. One farmer coming up after that is a part of the Future Beef Farmer Programme, and he'll be talking about his system, Shane Keaveney, and we have Martin Connolly then, who's part of the Dairy Beef 500 programme. So what I intend to do is we'll have the 4 speakers, and after each presentation we'll have a couple of questions, and then we'll have a panel discussion at the end with our 2 beef farmers, and they can talk about how they put into action on their own farm some of the things we've heard about tonight. So without any further delay, I'll invite our first speaker, Dr. Paul Crossan, who's a Beef Enterprise Leader at Teagasc Grange.
Okay, thank you, Chairman, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So, what I'm going to speak about is drivers of profitability on beef cattle farming, and where have we come from, and to what extent can we continue to improve those key drivers of profitability. When I initially set out to look at these profit drivers, I was going to look at 4 or 5 different, key drivers that affect profitability on beef farms. But really, in the context of a 15-minute presentation, there's only a couple of things that we can really dwell on. So if we look at it from the point of view of profitability, the key issues are, how can we reduce production costs? And looking at production costs, really all of our research revolves around maximising lifetime performance from grazed pasture. Even though we'll have seen presentations throughout the year of the impact of fertiliser cost increases on the cost of grazed grass, you still have a relativity. Grazed grass at 1, grass silage about 2.5 times more expensive, concentrates about 4.5 times more expensive. So regardless of the increase in costs for all feeds, grazed grass and achieving maximum performance from grazed grass is absolutely essential. And we need to have long grazing seasons, good lifetime performance. In terms of suckling systems, what we want to do is calve compactly in the spring, so that as cow demand increases, and indeed as calf demand increases throughout the season, we turn out to pasture. We have a highly nutritious, low-cost feed, and we want to get our cows on that system as soon as possible. Of course, we have some very efficient, specialised autumn calving systems, but by and large, spring calving is the lowest cost way we have of producing beef. Efficiently producing replacements. We do need to provide replacements. Something in the order of 16 to 18% is optimal in terms of genetic progress. So we do need to be efficient. My colleague Colin Byrne will speak a little bit about age at first calving. I'm going to touch on it here as well in a few slides on. But reducing the number of replacements we require. If we require more than that 18%, up to 25% in some herds, obviously that's a cost and a reduction in output on our farms. Probably in the context of other enterprises, beef is the enterprise where you need good quality winter feed. So we do need to optimise performance, and that's not maximising performance. We do know about the phenomenon of compensatory growth. So we don't want to maximise performance during winter feeding periods, but certainly for that first winter and the second winter, if you're going back to grass for a third season, you're looking at 0.6, 0.7, 0.8 kilos a day. Anything more than that, we have plenty of research to show that the animals that perform better will lose that weight advantage come the middle towards the end of the subsequent grazing season. Of course, that's only half the equation. The other half is output value. And we need to be very clear about output value. The number one element of that is optimising individual animal performance. You know, live weight performance, reproductive performance, optimising individual animal performance. A lot of focus goes into stocking rate, and for sure where you have good individual animal performance, carrying more of them efficiently will make you more profitable. But the first and foremost step is having good individual animal performance. And then it's about maximising stocking rate according to whatever farm constraints you have. That might be labour, it might be facilities, it might be your own time, it might be availability of specialised skills, and indeed it might be the availability of the type of animal you want. If you're in a calf to beef system, there might be a limit in terms of the availability of the animal you want at the price that you can pay. So maximising stocking rates when you have good individual animal performance. So if we look at the key profit drivers, and this is a piece of work we carried out for our open day this year, and we looked at suckler calf, and we did the same for dairy calf to beef systems, and the profit drivers are pretty similar. So I'm just going to look at it in the context of suckler systems in the interest of time. For the suckler calf to weanling phase, the number one profit driver that influences performance is age at first calving. I'll come back to it a little bit later, and as I said, my colleague Colin Bourne will touch on it later as well. In the context of suckler weaning to beef systems, and this really is not surprising, the number one factor driving profitability is daily gain. Good daily gain in cattle production systems, and we all know this, is key to maximising profitability, regardless of whether you're in a dairy calf to beef system or in a suckler calf to beef system. And just as an aside, as part of this analysis, we also looked at greenhouse gas emissions, and you know, age of first calving, where you reduce age of first calving, you reduce emissions, or turn to the flip side, where age of first calving is older, emissions are greater. Looking at average daily gain, improving average daily gain improves profitability and reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm going to focus on live weight gain for the next few slides, and I've just taken a 10-year trend line in terms of live weight performance for beef cattle in Ireland. I've looked at heifers, either coming from the suckler herd or from the dairy beef, coming from the dairy side of the house. I looked at steers from suckler systems or from derived from dairy dams, and young bulls. And you can see that, you know, from 2012 right through to 2021, we've had really, really good improvements in live weight performance. And I think sometimes we're slow to, you know, point out where we have made progress and we have made improvements. And look across the lines here. I mean, we're 4 to 5% on the heifer side, so you know that's reasonable performance over a 10-year period. Steers plus 10%, 10-11% improvement in steer live weight performance in a 10-year period. Bulls 8% on the suckler side, 1% on the dairy side. So I think it's worthwhile where we do see improvements in performance, particularly where this is one of our key profit drivers, that we emphasise that. And we try and, if you like, ascertain where that has arrived from. And look, it's difficult to break this out in terms of what drove to what extent. But certainly carcass specs, the QPS came in 2009, a greater focus on aged slaughter, a greater focus on the 400 kilo carcass, and that would have had an impact on slaughter age, so attempting to get animals into the specs at an earlier age. Herd health, we're going to hear from Natasha in the next presentation, and I think, look, again, there's some really, really interesting information I think you're going to see in the next few moments around the impact of improving herd health on live weight performance and days to slaughter. AHI established in 2009, beef health check programme, parasite programmes, calf care programmes, BVD programmes, young programmes. We've had a host of programmes that all in their own way are having an impact on live weight performance. Genetics, the Eurostar reviews in 2012, 2015, there's constant genetic progress coming from the AI stations, coming from farmers using the best bulls. BDGP, genomics coming in around that time, 2015 and 16, and then BDGP programme driving that from 2016. So genetics clearly has a role, as we know, in terms of live weight performance. All of this requires advisory and KT. We need to deliver this information. We need to get uptake of this information and dissemination. Our advisory and KT programmes, if we go back to 2009, the Teagasc Farmers Journal Better Farm programme was established. We also had European and national government funded KT schemes in the meantime. We have today launched the DB 500, last year the Future Beef programme. So there are a number of programmes, and I know the individual processors and individual organisations also have KT programmes. All of these are having an impact. Very difficult to put a value on each of those, but we know the herd health aspects, the genetic improvement, feed quality improvements, all of these are happening. Equally, we need to have KT programmes to expedite that, to get that adopted to the greatest possible extent. And finally, I suppose, producer standards, and finally, in terms of what I have here, I'm sure people can think of other things that have driven that. Borbia S-Class, so a revision of the old BQAS in 2017. We now have a sustainability beef and lamb assurance scheme, again, driving greater standards, greater focus, a little bit like your NCT, it's a torture when it comes up, but you do have to make these improvements when you know what's happening. When your BQS comes up, you do need to look at your paperwork, you do need to look at your management standards on the farm, and all of these things are continuous improvement in terms of management on farms. What does that mean? Well, I suppose improvements in livestock performance predominantly manifest themselves as earlier slaughter age. So if we look at slaughter age, again the same arrangement in this slide: suckler beef and dairy beef for heifers, suckler beef and dairy beef for steers, and suckler beef and dairy beef for bulls. And you can see in terms of the slaughter rate reductions, the only one, and we do need to look at this a little bit closer, I suspect there might be some interaction with first calving heifers on the suckler beef side. But if we look across the board, dairy beef heifers gone from 25.2 to 24.1 months of age. Massive progress on the steer side, 30 months to 26.8 months for sucklers, 29.7, so in around 30 to 26 for dairy beef steers. That's real substantial progress. I mean, you should recognise that as an industry at farm level, the progress that has been made in terms of live weight performance and slaughter age. The same on the young bull side, less of a reduction on the for dairy bred young bulls, but certainly the suckler young bulls, a nice reduction in slaughter rate. Importantly, this has in almost all categories come with no reduction in carcass weight. In fact, in a lot of cases we've seen improvements in carcass weight. So if you look at the heifer side, suckler beef heifers, no change in age at slaughter, but we have 20 kilos heavier in carcass. No change for the dairy beef, 3 kilos heavier for suckler beef. So we've a 3.2 month younger slaughter age, and no changing. So we're holding our carcass weight, it's about 3 kilos heavier. So for all intents and purposes, there's no change there. Slightly lighter on the dairy beef side, but again, over 3 months younger. And on the bull side, no change for either suckler bulls or dairy beef bulls. So, and that's a positive thing. We've reduced slaughter age and we haven't lost anything in terms of output from those animals. So what are the implications of that? Firstly, less feed. We're slaughtering animals, same weight, a lot younger. That's less feed. Facility savings, labour savings, where the animals in some cases don't need to go back into the shed again for a subsequent winter. In other cases they don't need to go back out to pasture, or they're slaughtered earlier off pasture or earlier out of the shed. Lower greenhouse gas emissions. The Director mentioned the importance of greenhouse gas emissions. We have a food vision report, we have climate targets, so greenhouse gas emissions are really very much in the front line. But apart from all of that, we export 90 to 95% of the beef that we produce. Our customers are asking us, what is the carbon footprint? What are we doing to reduce our carbon footprint? So from a customer perspective, we have to be showing improvement, and I think we have a really good story to tell in that regard. And ultimately, it's about profitability. And I'll show it in the next slide when we drill down a little bit into one of the systems. Where you slaughter early, or particularly where you retain carcass weight, you will drive profitability at farm level. So I'm going to take one example here and look at the suckler steers over a 10-year period. And you can see that's a little bit more detail around the previous slide. We've gone from 30 months of age to 26.8 months of age. So that's a really, substantial reduction in slaughter rate. A little bit choppy, and you're always going to get that. Some years are going to increase slightly, some years are going to go down. You can particularly see the impact of fodder crisis years, 2013, 2012, 2018, the protests of 2019. All of these things have an impact. But by and large, we could draw a straight line through this and show really continuous and steady progress. So on the suckler steer side, we're slaughtering almost 100 days earlier. And that's really enormous progress. Similar carcass weights, as I said. Similar grading, R equals 3 equals. In fact, they're slightly better, but in the context of what we're looking at here, no change. Greenhouse gas emissions savings. If the cattle we are killing today, or in 2021, were slaughtered at the same age as the cattle, similar cohort of cattle in 2012, we would have produced an extra little over 40 kilotons of CO2 equivalents. That's a big savings in greenhouse gas emissions. It's a massive reduction in carbon footprint as well. Again, going back to the customer piece. But the most important line here from my perspective, in terms of what does it mean at farm level, This is at feed costs, and the director again mentioned the implications of the war in Ukraine, the implications of the feed costs and so on. And don't need to tell you what's happening on concentrate price. We don't need to say what happened on fertiliser prices. But at current feed costs, that's a saving of 25 million euros to the industry, to the farm industry in terms of feed savings. That's grazed pasture saving, grass silage savings, and concentrate savings just for that animal cohort. So it's about 100 euros, a little less than 100 euros per head in feed cost savings. And that's really, really important to bear that in mind. All of these traits are profitability and farm level performance traits. So I suppose the question is that it? Have we achieved our potential, and is there much more we can do? Well, there is, and just to take one example, this is the fat class of steers and heifers killed in 2021. And without going into detail here, what this information is saying that, let's say a 2+, so 2+ is our industry standard. We want everything above 2+. So let's say you target a 3- to give yourself a little bit of breathing space in terms of meeting the fat class. 84% of our heifers are greater than 3-, and 70% of steers are greater than 3-. So there is potential there. But even more so, if we go greater than 4-, greater than or equal to 4-, half of our heifers are greater than or equal to 4-, and 25% of our steers are greater than or equal to 4-. It'll differ depending on breed, it'll differ depending on farm economics, whether it's a sensible thing to carry them a little bit over a fat class. If they're still gaining weight, you might think it's a sensible thing to do. And in some cases, depending on price movements, if it's increasing, if you're gaining a little bit of weight, then maybe that makes sense in your situation. But look at the biological efficiency of carrying animals for longer. This is work carried out at Teagasc Grange, and we looked at finishing animals over a 3-month period or over a 6-month period. Now this is, extending the finishing period pretty much beyond what you would do commercially, but it illustrates the point around biological efficiency. Your average daily gain where you slaughter over a 3-month period is 1.4. Where you kill over a 6-month period, your daily gain really drops off dramatically to 1.16. So about a 20% reduction in daily gain. Carcass gain, similar story, about a 20% reduction. Fat score in this case goes up from a 3 equals to a 3+. So you do gain a fat score, of course, but there's a big cost to that, particularly if you look at concentrate intake, kilograms of dry matter per day, from 10 kilos to 11.2 kilos on average over the finishing period. So what's the feed efficiency? How much feed do you need to get each kilo of gain, depending on whether you kill over or finish over a 3-month or over a 6-month period? You go from 7.2 to close to 10 on a live weight basis, or 9, or sort of 10-ish, let's say, to close to 14 on a carcass weight basis. So you're about 40% less efficient when you go into that longer, and that's an economic cost in terms of the amount of feed you require to put into that system to generate a kilo of gain. I won't go into this because I know the later speakers are going to touch on elements of this. There's a lot around live weight performance in terms of what's driving it. Obviously on the suckling system we want good milk, good calf rearing, particularly in your dairy calf to beef systems, but equally in your suckling systems, animal health and husbandry and so on. Good herd health will be touched on in the next presentation. I mentioned at the outset grazing management. Grass is our cheapest feed. Good grazing management, the availability of pasture over a long grazing season. Quality forage, we need quality forage for our winter periods. Optimising indoor feeding, again I touched on this at the outset. We don't want to maximise performance. That's from an economic point of view is not a desirable thing to do. And genetics, we need to continue to improve genetics. We need to continue to focus on genetics and using high Eurostar bulls and high Eurostar sires. So just moving on to the second profit driver, age at first calving. So the 10-year trend, and this is the only slide I have up where there is a dairy figure in it. So age at first calving, if you look at it on the suckler side over a 10-year period, we've seen very little progress. We've gone from 31.6 to 31.3 months first calving. So there is a lot of potential there in terms of age at first calving. If we look at it on the dairy side, the age at first calving in the same 10-year period, gone from 28 months of age to 26 months of age. So there has been progress there. There might be a view that they calve everything at 2 years of age and that they always have. Certainly not. 28 months of age or thereabouts in 2012, 26 months of age now. So there's still scope, I'm sure, for progress there. But looking at the suckler side, 31 months of age in terms of age at first calving, and as I said, little change in that 10-year period. Again, drilling down a little bit more into the most recent year, 2021, and this is where I see, grounds for optimism in terms of age at first calving. As I said, average age of first calving, 31.3 months of age, but there is a very obvious peak at 2 years of age. If we look at 2 years of age calving, in and around a third of our first calving sucklers calve at less than 26 months of age, and that's where you want to be, that 22 to 26 months of age in terms of a 2-year-old calving system. So if we look at any 4-month period, most of our cows actually calve in and around that 2 years of age. And that's a really positive message. Again, there's a view that we can't calve sucklers at 2 years of age. I know it's going to be covered in one of the later presentations, and I know we have a farmer speaker who will speak about his own experience doing it. But clearly the national data is showing that, the plurality, if you like, of cows calve in and around 2 years of age. But equally, we have a lot of cows that calve at 3 years of age. We're in a seasonal calving system, so if you miss the boat in this spring, you're not calving in the autumn, then the next boat comes the following spring. So we have 31% of our cows calving at greater than 34 months of age, and that's again a cost in the system. The question might be asked, well, are those later calving cows, are those the later maturing breeds, and it's all early maturing breeds at 2 years of age? Again, looking at the information here, that's not the case. We have a lot of first calving cows in our late maturing breed types. So massive potential there. What would be the potential savings or gains? So I just looked at one piece of analysis to see what could be gained in terms of moving some of those 3-year-old calvers into a 2-year-old calving system. So this is the trend line in terms of the cohorts calving at different age groups in 2021. Again, you'll see the peak calving in around 2 years of age, and a secondary peak in and around 3 years of age. So just in terms of a hypothetical scenario, I looked at moving 50% of those 3-year-old calvers to a 2-year-old calving system. So you can see that you're moving some of those, it's about 24,162 if we look at the national population. If we move 50% of those animals into a 2-year calving system, what would that mean? It'd move our average first calving age by 2 months. So our average first calving age would move from 30.2 to 28.2. I think that's, in terms of the timelines, let's say to 2030 or thereabouts, I think that's the type of numbers, we're not going to get to 24 months of age, we're not going to calve all our first calvers at 24 months of age, but we have to have some target in terms of reducing that. That will reduce greenhouse gas emissions nationally by about 50 kilotons. It will reduce our carbon footprint very substantially, but most importantly, it would reduce feed costs by about €400 per head. So moving from a 3-year-old to a 2-year-old calving system. And if we multiply that across those 25,000 or so suckler cows, it's worth about 10 million to the industry, in terms of feed costs. And these are real money. This is real feed costs. And again, I don't need to spell it out in terms of where we find ourselves this last 12 to 18 months. So in summary, Chairman, the objective is to maximise live weight performance at least cost. High beef merit genetics, quality grazed pasture, quality winter feed, appropriate to the system that you're operating, excellent animal health and high standards in animal husbandry. And I think I'm really confident looking at the data that in all of those categories we have made really good progress. I think there's more to be had, but we have made really good progress over the last 10 years, particularly in live weight gain. Average reduction in 65 days. If we look across all our categories, we've reduced slaughter age by over 2 months in the last 10 years in our steer and heifer systems and about 3 weeks in our bull systems. Massive savings here, and look, I've gone through the numbers. Feed cost savings, reduction in labour, less greenhouse gas emissions. Less progress is evident for age at first calving, but again, when I looked into the actual numbers, you look at the high level numbers, and the director again made a comment at the outset, that an average hides a multitude, and the average age at first calving of 31.3 or 31.6 months of age, whichever year you look at it, you might think, we're really not where we want to be at. But when you break down the numbers, you actually have a very substantial cohort of cows calving at 2 years of age. So there's obviously big opportunities there, and I think there's a lot of potential to make gains in that category as well. So, Chairman, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Paul. Very interesting. If anybody has a question, there is a form on your seat there that you can scan in with your phone and text in your question. Or if you want to do it old school, stick up your hand and we'll get a microphone around to you. If anybody has any questions there, you can put up a hand. Paul, I think it's fair to say there's a lot of factors influence profitability on, we'll talk about particularly suckler farms. I'm going to put you on the spot here, but if there's one particular item that we can bring home here tonight as suckler farmers, the quickest and easiest way to generate more profit on our suckler farms.
Yeah, and I would go back, and I know we're going to cover it in a lot more detail later on, but age at first calving. If we look at age at first calving, we've looked at all the profit drivers. Age at first calving is the number one issue and the biggest factor that will reduce costs, increase profitability in suckler beef systems.
The quickest win for us as farmers. Okay. Anybody want to ask a question of Paul? We will have a question and answer session after all the presentation with our farmers as well. So if you want to hold on to that, or as I say, you can text in between. But if nobody has any questions there, we'll bring up our second speaker. Natasha Mune from Animal Health Ireland will give a presentation on lesions in animals slaughtered. I think you'll find this very interesting, and it shows where there's more gains to be made through an animal's lifetime in terms of health.
Great, thank you very much. So, I'm from Animal Health Ireland. I'm going to be talking to you today about health. And I'm just starting off by saying that what I'm going to tell you initially is not news to you. Absolutely not. Poor health is widely recognised to negatively affect performance in cattle. We know this. I don't have to convince anybody to call their vet when there's an outbreak on farm. But what I want to talk to you today about the diseases that might go unrecognised in cattle, subclinical diseases that you don't necessarily see any outward signs, and often all you see are lesions at slaughter. And this forms the basis of the beef health check program that Animal Health has put together, and it's essentially delivered in partnership with Meat Industry Ireland and the department. And we've been collecting abattoir data, health data from abattoirs from 17 factories nationwide since 2016. And the primary aim of the program is to collect this health information that you might not necessarily be aware of as farmers and deliver that back to yourselves. So the data collection, it happens online in real time with the veterinary inspectors that are on the line with the red offal looking at livers and at lungs. And they're specifically looking for three main categories of diseases, and those are liver fluke parasites, liver abscesses, and pneumonias in the lungs. And that's collected on the line, and the liver fluke, they actually distinguish between whether they see live parasites, or the actual fluke worms on the livers, or whether it's just damage to the liver from those parasites. That gets captured immediately online, and it's sent on a regular basis to ICBF. And as well as then for each batch of animals that get sent to slaughter, you as farmers receive a report that give information about the liver and the lung lesions at slaughter. If for whatever reason you might not have that report, or you've lost the one from a couple of years ago, all of that data is actually also captured on ICBF itself and is accessible to you as farmers through the services tab on ICBF. Under AHI Animal Health, there's actually a tab for Beef Health Check that you can access that information. You can also make that information available to your veterinarians and to your Teagasc advisors. If you give them permission, they can access that data to help make decisions around health for your animals specifically. But the data as a whole is also contributing to breeding values and genetic evaluations. And ICBF, for a few years now, have proofs that rank the predicted prevalence of liver fluke. Essentially what that means for AI bulls that are available, you can choose bulls that are less likely to have liver fluke in their progeny. And that's available on the ICBF website under the genetic evaluations, TB and liver fluke. At the moment it's not incorporated, as I understand it, into the main breeding values, but you can still, if you're coming from a particularly fluky area, for example, think long-term and start to breed animals that are more resilient to liver fluke. The other thing that we're doing with this data at a national level is it's anonymously sent to us at AHI, and we report on it nationally, and we also do some analysis, which is what I'm going to go into a little bit today as well. So just to start with liver fluke, I think it's very widespread within Ireland. I think we're all aware of it as a parasite, and it needs this intermediate snail, host, and wet ground for its life cycle. So as you can see from that map, the areas from the northwest of Ireland, you're more likely to have liver fluke. A large proportion of herds are affected that will actually have signs of liver fluke at slaughter, and that tends to be most of our beef suckler systems and sheep areas. And what it is as those immature liver flukes migrate through the liver, they cause a lot of damage. It can result in poor thrive for the animals. That's something that you could actually see with them, but usually, and it can result in acute deaths if it's a very high percentage of liver fluke. And in sheep, that's particularly a problem, that you'll just have sheep that die of anemia. But in cattle, what you see more is a chronic condition. You might not see anything at all. All that might have is, there's previous studies in Ireland have shown a decrease in weight at slaughter. And other studies have also shown decrease in fertility, for example, and some other and condition and so on. But what are we seeing at slaughter? So this is just the figures that we have for the young stock. Since we've been recording in 2016, liver fluke damage, so that's chronic damage to the liver, but not necessarily seeing parasites itself, is that top yellow line that you're seeing there, and the red line underneath it is just if they're seeing live parasites at slaughter. So live parasites are seen in about 1.2% of animals that come in through the abattoirs as part of the program, and liver fluke damage around about 5% of animals that are coming through. And we had a particularly dry period in 2018 where it says there are no data, that we unfortunately couldn't capture data during that period, but that was a drought in Ireland, the summer of 2018. And liver fluke hasn't quite recovered since that time. So the levels have dropped after that summer, and they've remained fairly low, and there could be a number of reasons for that. When it comes to liver abscesses, that's then the second condition that we see at slaughter. It's actually unrelated to the liver fluke itself. This is more related to ruminal acidosis, which can be clinical or subclinical. And this relates usually to feeding a high energy ration. So finishing your animals, usually what happens is you might quickly change to feeding a concentrate feed with lower roughage, and if the rumen isn't given time to adapt, you get an acidosis, there's an overgrowth of the wrong type of bacteria, and you get liver abscesses or laminitis affecting the hooves and some lameness. And that can be associated with reduced weight gains and feed efficiency that's been shown in previous studies as well. And the third condition then is pneumonia, and that I think is something that we're all familiar with, respiratory disease. It's particularly a problem in calves, but it's a very complex disease in that it has multiple causes, bacteria, viruses, even lungworm, and then combining those with environmental stresses such as poor ventilation or for young stock, maybe around weaning, transport, housing. There's a lot of factors that can go into whether animals actually get sick from this or not. But there could be a chronic side of this disease, and then it's also associated just with lower weight, lower carcass weight, and decreased growth performance amongst others. What are we seeing then in the abattoir since 2016? Liver abscesses in around 3.5% of animals at slaughter, and pneumonias in around 1.6% of animals at slaughter. And that they've remained fairly steady over the years. There hasn't been any decrease that we've seen. So we've been collecting this health information since 2016, up until 2021 in this particular study, and we've looked here specifically in heifers, steers and young bulls, but we've also got information for cows and for bulls, and those tend to be your cull cows from the dairy side mostly. But what can this data actually tell us about the age to slaughter? So we have a large number of records, and I think Paul's already gone into some of this age information, but for the data set that we have, this is just a spread of the age of the heifers when they go to slaughter. And we're averaging out on this data set around 777 days for your heifers, but you can see that there's a range, there's a very wide spread. The same is true for your steers. There's more steers that are slaughtered compared to the heifers, but again there's this massive range, and the steers are coming in at a slightly older. We also have these definite peaks at about 30 months of age and 36 months of age for our heifers and steers. When it comes to our young bulls, those tend obviously to be slaughtered younger, just under 580 days. And then for them as well, you've got the 16-month, strictly speaking, young bulls. The cutoff there is 16 months, which is why you have that peak just before that. But there are some older, up to 24 months, that are classified as young bulls by the abattoirs. So there's a range of age. How do we pull then what kind of what the health data? How do you interpret the health data in light of this range? There's so many other factors as well that influence the time to finish. You know, you're looking at weight, you're looking at fat score, you're making decisions as farmers as to when to send your animals to slaughter. It depends as well on when the animals are born as to how they're finishing, if they're finishing off grass, finishing off concentrates, how quick those average daily gains are. What is the breed types would influence their age and how they grow and whether they're ready for slaughter or not. And the herd type is and the production system. And that's actually, we've got this really large data set, but the truth is that's one of the hardest things to glean from farmers is what is the herd type. And there's recently been a study that has classified herds in Ireland according to some main distinctions: beef, dairy, fattening, stores, and trading herds, and then some subcategories as well, where they've actually tried to identify, well, who's a beef to a sucklet beef system, who's rearing dairy males, and just trying to identify those to help us understand this data a little bit better. But the other things to consider is the geographic location. If we think about liver fluke, that it's definitely more of a problem in the northwest, and then the health conditions. So we've considered all of these factors, and what we've seen that when it comes to liver fluke, with heifers and steers, that we have on average in beef herds that they're 38 days older if they have any sign of liver fluke at slaughter. So it's slightly higher. There's some variability for this depending on the type of herd. So if we consider all herds, it's around 40 to 46 days older in heifers and steers, and it can go as low as 32 days when we're looking at suckler herds. So there's a little bit of a range, but for beef herds in general, it's about 38 days older. There's no effect in young bulls, which I thought was quite interesting, and it's probably related to the burden of liver fluke that these animals are picking up. For the most part, they're already in their finishing stage when they would be grazing off pastures when fluke is a risk. But we don't see an effect in them. The effect of poor health on performance is also cumulative, so over time it will get worse. It's worse for chronic conditions. And what we see here is we've split the liver fluke into an active liver fluke, so where we're actually seeing the parasite at slaughter, and when there's liver fluke damage. And you can see that for heifers and steers, you're looking at 18 to 24 days, or 28 to 24 days older if it's just the parasite you're seeing, which is a more recent infection, say, whereas it's up to 40, 43 days if the animals are already showing scarring of the liver, so it's been a longer term infection, so there's been more of an effect. When it comes to liver abscesses, this is not quite as dramatic, but still is significant. 8 to 9 days, animals that had liver abscesses were 8 to 9 days older at slaughter if they were heifers or steers. 5 to 6 days for young bulls. And then for pneumonias, we're looking at 11 to 15 days older if they had pneumonia, and young bulls about 3 days. So again, you can see for young bulls the effect is less, probably just because the time that they have these diseases is less, and so that cumulative effect is not there. So I've thrown some numbers at you, but why does it actually matter? The animals are fairly healthy. If they've made it to the abattoir, they're still physically quite healthy animals. But the factor is that older animals are less profitable. They cost money to feed and house. So what we're not considering is these indirect costs, these hidden costs. So if you think about, say, just take the prevalence of liver fluke, say 5% of your animals take 38 days extra to finish. How much does an animal cost per day to feed? I've seen numbers from 50 cents to €5, so it depends on your system. Think about how much that would cost. At the very minimum, if you say have 2 animals that had liver fluke and you prevented that by treating them, you would cover the cost of the fluke treatment for the herd. So, you know, if it's needed, As I mentioned, some areas for liver fluke, for example, in the southeast, you might not even need liver fluke treatment. But where it's present, there's definite savings to be had that you may not be aware of. The other thing about older animals, and Paul has already touched on this, is that just that they have a higher environmental footprint, and that's becoming increasingly important. So reducing age is all about efficiency. It's optimizing that cost per kilogram. And these subclinical losses are hidden by default. That's just their nature. And they result in a decreased production, and it's the additional upkeep costs. So it's not money changing hands as such, but we're still losing money over the long term. So the bottom line here when it comes to animal health is just that prevention is better than cure. The loss in performance and feed conversion that I've showed you here as a concept, it applies for other diseases. It's just the fact that these are the 3 diseases that we're actually collecting information on at slaughter, and so we have this data available to us. But it applies for the others as well. And herd health planning is a definite thing to improve profitability. It's been shown to improve profitability. You think that vaccination dosing costs money, but actually there are longer term gains. Looking at nutrition, housing, biosecurity, looking at all of those things, that's what herd health planning is about, is preventing diseases on farm. If you think about a respiratory outbreak, for example, if you vaccinate, you prevent an outbreak, you prevent the direct costs that you're giving to the vet, your labour costs looking after those animals, but also if there's a few animals might remain chronically ill, you're also preventing those production losses down the line. So prevention is better than a reaction. And the other thing about these performance measures, we mention live weight all the time as a performance measure, average daily gains, but are we actually measuring them? It's a tool that we can use, otherwise we have no idea whether our performance is good or not. What is the condition of adult animals, looking at the slaughter reports that are available to us. And there was mention as well of the genetic improvements that have been made over the last decade or so, but these gains can actually be lost just because of poor animal health. So you could have the best animals in the block, but if there's an outbreak on farm, you lose those benefits. So it's just to re-emphasize the importance of animal health, which I'm sure all of you understand. So thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Natasha. I think what I took from that anyways is that we need every animal to be making money for us every day he's on the farm, that animal's on the farm. And also maybe we should be doing more in terms of measuring the average daily gain in terms of live weight that the animal is putting on, and that maybe we'll be able to spot some of these issues that you're spotting after slaughter will be something we can do for ourselves on farm.
Yeah, because also I guess not everybody is slaughtering animals as well, which is maybe an issue. So you think, this doesn't apply to you, but this is gains over the life of the animal. In the earlier life, in the weaning stages, are you measuring those daily gains? That's something physical that you can do today. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We have some questions in on the text line. If anybody wants to scan in the code, you can send in a text. Well, Catherine, you have some questions for us?
Yeah, thanks, Natasha. Excellent presentation. A few questions in from the herd beef health check report that you mentioned. Is it free to access for farmers and ICBF, and how do they access it?
Yeah, so it's free to access on ICBF. You will need a login if for whatever reason you're not a breeding herd and you don't have ICBF. At the moment, you just have to register through their system, so you have to contact them just to register, and then it's available on the health screens. And it's essentially, if you've slaughtered an animal in the last 7 years at one of those 17 plants, that data should be there for you.
If you have an animal with a heavy lung worm burden, will that be picked up on the factory beef health check report?
Unfortunately, not necessarily. Unless they've caused a bit of a chronic pneumonia, they won't necessarily know that it's lungworm specifically, and it's not mentioned as such. Yeah.
Thanks. And if there's a rumen fluke present on the farm, how long after housing should they be treated for a rumen fluke?
For rumen fluke. So that would be a totally different type of fluke. It affects the animals differently, and for the most part, if there's rumen fluke present, that you don't necessarily have to treat unless there's clinical cases on farm. So rumen fluke is a different parasite. It shares a similar life cycle to liver fluke, but you would be, but it's very widespread in Ireland. But for the most part, unless it's causing clinical signs, especially like for example, if you involved in the BEEP scheme and you saw the fecal egg results and that rumen fluke came up, unless you've got clinical cases on farm, you don't need to be treating for rumen fluke. But if you do need to treat, there is something going on, the animal's poor thrive, scour, something like that, speak to your vet because the dose for rumen fluke is different to liver fluke, and so it's always worth speaking to your vet first about that one.
Thanks. And the last question, there's a lot of questions, just the last one. In relation to the liver score of 4, how can you find out what has caused that particular damage?
So 4 is unfortunately one of those categories that doesn't fit the others, and it's another kind of thing. And these are often, for example, a cancer or something physical that's some, for example, if there's a wire or something that's damaged the liver, but it essentially wouldn't be an abscess and wouldn't be liver fluke. So it's sort of like it's something else going on. Often it might be a cancer or one of those, but because of the speed of the line, we have to draw a line somewhere as to what the vets actually input, and so they've just marked it as something else going on with the liver.
Thanks, Natasha.
Thanks very much, Catherine. Our next speaker is Colin Byrne, beef researcher in Teagasc Grange, and Colin's going to give us a presentation on age at first calving. As I say, we have our farmer coming up then after that. At the end, we can talk a bit more to our farmer and discuss his practice and his experience of calving at 24 months old. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So yeah, I'm just going to, I suppose, talk about how reducing the age of first calving can be a key profit driver on beef farms. So first of all, I'll cover some of the introduction of where we're at, adding to what Paul has already presented. There are, I suppose, many barriers that farmers see as barriers to adoption of reducing their age of first calving, and I'll discuss some of those and how we can deal with them and how they may not actually be as bad as we think they are. There are advantages to reducing age of first calving. As our director pushed at the beginning, we're constantly looking for win-wins. This is a win-win, and I'll discuss and show you how it is. And then I suppose we'll talk about the path to successfully reducing age at first calving, with a focus on age of puberty, calving dates, so when a heifer actually calves in her first year, and how can this affect, I suppose, her lifetime performance in your herd, and then some care of these heifers in and around calving. And then I've also case studies, so it's more so, I suppose, some introduction to Shane Keaveney, who will be available, and I suppose has a very impressive setup with excellent reproductive management. So look, here we have just under a quarter of heifers calving between 23 and 26 months of age. I suppose nationally, if we look at what reducing age of first calving from 36 to 24 months of age can do, it's the equivalent of 0.6 of a tonne reduction in CO2 equivalents per cow. So what Paul spoke about earlier was very much at an overall industry level, and I'm going to talk a lot more at farm level for yourselves. So there's also major economic benefits in a grass-based system, so this is where our win-win is going to come in. And very important, I suppose, key to success of this are meeting weight for age targets, and I'll go into this in a good bit of detail, and then also how bull selection is going to play an important part in these heifers when they're calf younger. So I suppose first off, if we go out to farm and we talk to farmers about maybe what are the reasons that you prefer not to calve at 24 months of age, there are a number of reasons. So the first one being that these heifers will be difficult to calve. And if we just look here, I suppose, at the proportion of heifers that calve unassisted at between 23 and 26 months of age versus 3 years plus. And you can see here that there's a very small difference. I think what's important to take from this data is that regardless of the age a heifer calves at, that a high proportion of first calvers will require some level of assistance. Okay, so that's going to be something that's very important. Also in this, bull selection is going to come into it, and again, weight for age. So I'm going to keep mentioning those two things throughout a lot of the presentation as key drivers of success of reducing age at first calving. The other one then is that it's easier to get her in calf the first time, but getting her back in calf the second time can be an issue. But again, if we look here, this ICVF data, you can see that again there's a very small difference in the proportion of heifers that calve for a second time. And this is going to be, I suppose, related to longevity, and we'll talk about this again as well. And then also, I suppose, one of the main things that we'll always hear is that if a heifer calves at this young age, she's going to be stunted her whole life. That it'll, I suppose, stop her reaching her full mature cow potential. But again, here you can see there's very, very little difference in the way this is. So, as I said, very large data set, over 130,000 heifers in this data set. And then one thing I think from this table, when I saw it first, it really, really struck me. And this is about the longevity of this cow. Okay, so a lot of farmers will say that heifers calved young will fall out of the system sooner than others, but this is not the case. It's actually quite the reverse. So you can see here that when heifers calved younger, between 23 and 26 months of age, just under 40% of these heifers lasted to their fifth parity, or I suppose reached their fifth parity. Some would have went on further, and I'll have a little bit of that on a slide in a minute. But heifers calving at 3 years and older, 0% reached their first parity, their fifth parity. And this is going to, I suppose, have a major implication on, I suppose, the maintenance cost of this cow, and definitely over her lifetime. If you have a cow that doesn't produce a better number of calves, she's going to have higher overheads throughout her whole life. As I said, it is a win-win. So we just look at some of this analysis here, based on a 40-hectare spring calving system, using a calf to weaning system, and comparing the economic and environmental performance of calving at 36 versus 24 months of age. So on the economic side, I suppose, and again, I'm looking at this on a farm level basis, there's a 75% difference in the net margin per cow. And what happens basically in this is that your gross output starts to drop as you're carrying, I suppose, more animals or more unproductive animals on your farm, eventually turning out to €38 a cow versus €152 per cow if she's calving at 24 months of age. On the environment, we can see here a 12% difference in the carbon footprint. So basically these cows are going to have one extra calf over their whole lifetime, and I suppose this can basically be spread out or associated with emissions that can be then diluted down. So you can see here 11.2 kg of CO2 equivalent for heifers that calve at 24 months of age versus just under 13 if they're calving at 36 months of age. So there's a number of factors, I suppose, that we consider as affecting reproductive efficiency. We all know reproductive efficiency, I suppose, is a key driver in any suckler system. 3 of them being age of puberty, postpartum interval, and conception rate. So I'm going to focus, I suppose, for the next few slides on the age of puberty. So it's defined as the onset of sexual maturation. There's a number of different factors that we know influence age of puberty. The first one being breed, so early versus late maturing animals, plane of nutrition, and this is where I'm going to spend some time. And then also heterosis, so if we can crossbreed some of our animals that have some of these early maturing versus late maturing attributes, we can get an intermediate age of puberty. It is also heritable, moderately heritable, so we can select for age of puberty. So currently the trait in our replacement index would be age of first calving, and that would be a lot highly associated with age of puberty in heifers. So just as we move through this, we have a couple of things that I suppose we need to bear in mind, and the importance of reaching age of puberty in these animals. Okay, so in this was a data set of 320 heifers. And we can see here the effect, we want to see here the effect that being pubertal at the beginning of the breeding season has on the conception rate of these animals. So from weeks 6 to 10 of the breeding season, in a 12-week breeding season, there was a 12 to 13% increase in conception rate if the heifer was pubertal at the beginning of the breeding season. Okay, by 12 weeks, this difference had eroded, or more of the heifers had gone in calf. But in a couple of slides, you're really going to see the importance of getting these heifers in calf early in the breeding season and what it does for their lifetime productivity. Also, just to mention, larger data sets, I suppose, at the same time had looked at the similar effects of being pubertal at the beginning of the breeding season, and they found, I suppose, similar results to what we reported in Grange. So then, if we look at the effects of plain and nutrition, okay, so these was heifers. These were heifers that were offered different diets early in life. So the mod diet would have grown about just over 0.6 kg per day versus the high growing at 1.16 kg or 1.2 kg per day. And then at 9 months of age, so that's where we come in here at 9 months of age on the 1, so week following differential feeding, everything goes on the same diet, and then we start monitoring how soon these animals reach puberty. So basically we monitor the whole way along, and then where the arrow has come in, you can see there that that's the start of the breeding season. So I suppose most notably about this is the proportions of animals that were pubertal at the beginning of the breeding season. So if animals that had grown well early in life, 80% of those heifers were pubertal at the beginning of the breeding season versus the heifers that hadn't performed as well, only 20% were pubertal. So I suppose, why is this important, okay? And basically what we're aiming for here is that we'll have heifers in calf earlier in the breeding season so that they'll then calve down earlier in their first calving season. So the continuous line here basically shows how long the heifers last, I suppose, if they have calved in the first 21 days of their first calving season. Okay, so if a heifer had calved in the first 21 days of her first calving season, just under 50% of those heifers lasted until their fourth calving season, whereas if she calved after the first 3 weeks, only 25 or around 25% of those heifers last until their fourth calving season. And then I suppose if we continue out and look at the fifth parity, which is similar to the data that I showed before, the results, I suppose, of this also stand true for those that had calved in the first 3 weeks of the breeding season. And what's basically happening here is, in a seasonal system that most of us are in Ireland, basically these heifers, they have their calf early in the calving season, and then they have more time between calving and when we want them to go back and calf, and there's less chance of them falling out of our system earlier in their life. And basically, I suppose the more calves this cow produces, the cheaper her overheads are going to be throughout her whole life. So how do we do this? How do we rear these animals so that they are pubertal and that we can get them in calf to last a good long time in our herds? So I suppose importantly, pre-weaning average daily gain is very, very important. We aim for in and around 1.2 kg per day, and in a second I'll just, I suppose, talk about the importance of that. Obviously needs to come from a very milky cow to achieve that level of performance. Good grassland management is also going to be really important, so that your cow is always producing as much milk as she can, and then when your calf does begin to consume grass, that he has a high quality grass in front of him. Just to briefly look, I suppose, again here at the importance of pre-weaning plain and nutrition and what it does for age of puberty. So on the top line of that table, you can basically see the 4 to 8 months of age, and that we saw a 70-day difference in age of puberty between animals that had grown over 1 kg per day versus under 1 kg per day. And that was from 4 to 8 months of age versus animals that I suppose had similar growth rates but from 8 to 13 months of age, so pre-weaning versus post-weaning. And in the post-weaning, although there was very different growth rates, we only saw a 13-day difference in age of puberty. So really, I suppose, driving home the importance of pre-weaning plain and nutrition for influencing the age of puberty in these animals. Then when it comes to breeding, so I suppose we want to target weight at breeding, at the beginning of breeding, of between 380 to 420 kg. So I suppose depending on our breed type here, some of our early maturing breeds will probably be between the lower end of this and our later heading up towards the upper of this range. Bull selection, we will say critical to this, in and around recommendation of no more than 8% calving difficulty with very, very high reliability for the trait. So this is basically going to tell you how much of a guessing game you're going on with your calving difficulty. I spoke about stock bull versus AI here, and it was no stock bull, or it's very unlikely that a stock bull is going to be suitable on both heifers and cows, okay? And Shane, as we talk about Shane's farm or his enterprise in a while, we give you a great example here of where he's, I suppose, uses AI in his heifers and then a stock bull on his cows, where you have more selection for using AI, when you use AI of suitable bulls. And then just importantly, I suppose, around, very importantly, around, I suppose, heifers and ensuring that your heifers are pubertal, that there's good heat detection on farm. Okay, lots of farmers may miss the heats in their heifers, or it'll also indicate, I suppose, whether a heifer is cycling or not. And if you're recording these heats, you can see what cycling, do I have an issue, as you go forward. I suppose that's probably applicable to repro in general, not just reducing the age of calving and heifers. So then, briefly in and around the pre and post calving care, okay? So heifers, they will need a little bit of extra attention. So I suppose heifers in good body condition will be allowed moderate quality silage similar to that of your cows, aiming for a minimum body condition score of 2.75, okay? And anything lower than this, you're going to have a heifer that's maybe too weak to calve, and she's definitely going to struggle to begin cycling or resume cycling once she calves in the springtime. And then if you are, I suppose, offering heifers that moderate quality silage, they should be penned separately, okay? Bullying is very, very likely to happen in a herd, and introducing new heifers into your cow herd that will be a little bit smaller at this stage of their life. Then in terms of post-calving and rebreeding, so monitoring body condition score is going to be very, very important here, okay? And just any major drops at this stage could be a major issue for the heifer, definitely losing no more than half a body condition score. The heifers should definitely be turned out, well, as any animals should be turned out to grass as soon as possible, and if they can't be, offer them your higher quality silage, the type of silage that you would probably give weanlings or finishing animals greater than 70% dry matter digestibility, and definitely give them priority, okay? These animals, we're hoping that they'll be calving down around 80% of what their mature weight will be, so they are still growing, also beginning to now milk that they're going to need to feed a calf and rear a calf. So then just, I suppose, to summarise what I've spoke about, so we know that there are some risks with reducing age at first calving. These can be managed. Weight for age, good bull selection are going to be very, very important to the success of this system. And then, I suppose, early life, good early life growth and meeting those weight for age targets means your heifer is more likely to be pubertal at the beginning of the breeding season, should hopefully go and calf early, then calve down early with greater chance of lasting in the herd. And then, as I said, we know it's a win-win in terms of both reduced carbon footprint and being more profitable. So, okay, at this stage, I just, before Shane comes up, Shane is after the next speaker, I just want to introduce Shane Keaveney. So Shane farms with his wife Grania in Ballinasloe in Roscommon, just under an hour outside the road, as he informed me today, on around 35.5 hectares, 37 spring calving cows in it, and then normally in an under 16-month bull system, and the heifers that aren't used as replacements are finished in around 21 to 22 months of age, stocked at 160 kg of organic nitrogen, with Charlie Devaney, his local advisor, and then he also works with Gabriel Trayers as part of the Future Beef programme. Just very, very quickly, if you look at, I suppose, some of Shane's figures, so I suppose 5-star on average across the herd and across every other category within his herd for replacement index. And then I suppose just when we talk about in the context of his replacements, breeding his own replacements, all calving down to 2 years of age, we just talk about the targets that he wants to meet. So you can see here his average daily gain is, or his pre-weaning average daily gain is very, very good. This was 2021 figures. They're actually improved for 2022. But you can see here that, I suppose, on his heifers, he weaned them at, or his 200 day weight was 258 kg. And one thing I suppose we just want to kind of point out where he is at that stage and where he needs to go next. So Shane will, or in, I suppose, breeding this year, those heifers were brought to the bull at an average of 410 kg. So that meant that they had 257 days to put on 152 kg, which is very, very achievable. And Shane's motto was always that the cow must do her job, so that's the way he selects his cow, that they have to do their job. And if the cow does her job, he weans a heavier calf, and it means in that 257 days, he has less work to do. And I think it's a very, very great motto and a good simple answer to the way a suppler system should be run. So in terms of how Shane would do it, so his very, very grass-focused farm, although it's a very, very heavy farm in Roscommon, uses, I suppose, very good weaning practice in terms of forward creep grazing and feeding some concentrates on the lead up to weaning. Has a good vaccination and dosing programme. Operates, I suppose, a gradual, no-stress weaning system, and then once weaned, puts them into 2 priority groups. Okay, so under 16-month bull system, and then a good few heifers going as replacements. He needs continual performance from those animals. You can see the weights there where his current cohort of animals are. They're both very, very good. They're housed then with plenty of space that the animals can, I suppose, all lie down on very good quality silage and a kg of meal. So I suppose just this year, and I suppose really we're lucky that we have that Shane can hear and tell us what he's done in the system this year, because he is really, really pushing, I suppose, the ball out in terms of what he's doing, and as innovative as you're going to get. So 12 maiden heifers to the bull at 410 kg. Heat detection, he's, I suppose, very aware of the importance of heat detection, so he this year hired a vasectomized bull and used a chin ball to do the heat detection for him, and is now using sex semen on his replacement heifers that will breed his next cohort of replacement heifers. Okay, so 10 to 12 heifers went in calf, 6 of them to sex semen, and used 9 of his sex straws, and then the other 4 to conventional AI. So there are some, I suppose, costs associated with this. And I suppose we will have Shane in a little while that can maybe go through, I suppose, his reasoning for it. But although there is additional cost with this, you have to remember that if he produces cows from this, the cost of that will be spread over the lifetime of the cow, and it's going to be greatly reduced. Just as well as some of Shane's stock, you can see here, I suppose, his cow base is predominantly Slayer Limousine based, and I suppose good, very, very healthy stock. And at that, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'll leave it there.
Thanks very much, Colin. Very informative. And again, I'll just repeat, if anybody's any questions for Colin or for Shane that's coming up shortly, you can text them into the number that's on your sheet there, on your chair. Colin, maybe a tricky one for you. Paul has told us it's more profitable. All the research and you've seen it's more profitable. Shane is doing it and you're seeing it out on farms. Why aren't we as suckler farmers calving more heifers at 2-year-old?
Yeah, look, I suppose that's a very, very good question. Like, as I said, there is, I suppose, perceptions there of like barriers of why the farmers don't want to do it. You know, I think particularly in some of the breeds we have, the weight for age is probably not met a lot of the way. And I think if you looked at the 4 kind of misconceptions that I highlighted up there, if farmers were to meet their weight for age bang on target, I think they'd worry about those issues a lot less. But I think that's probably one of the issues that we had said. We saw from some of our speakers earlier on how average daily gain basically underpins most of what we do. And I think exactly as to Natasha's closing comment as well, if we can improve lifetime average daily gain, all those weight for age targets will be met. And I think it'll be, I suppose, help reducing the age of first calving to be more successful.
So it actually probably comes back to doing a bit more measurement on farms ourselves to push that animal from birth up to that 15 months that she's putting on weight all the time.
Yeah, exactly that.
Okay. Thanks very much, Colin. So our final speaker is Nicky Byrne from Teagasc Grange, and Nicky's going to talk to us about red clover and its role in beef production.
Okay, thanks very much, Trevor. Okay, thanks Trevor, and thanks everyone for coming along this evening. This evening I'm going to talk to you about, has red clover a role on your farm? And really very much continuing on from where we've left off, has red clover a role in economically supporting higher levels of average daily gain that can support and help us achieve systems of reduced slaughter age or age at first calving? And we want to do this, from a low level of fertiliser use in our farm systems. So just to begin, I'm going to give a little bit of a context to my background and why I'm interested in red clover. I'm a livestock systems researcher, and my work to date has really focused on identifying animal genetics, grassland management and different nutritional strategies, that can help achieve highly profitable, high output systems that can, support reduced ages of slaughter. And we've done a lot of that through genetics and feeding of our grass diets. But really, when we go back and look at the figures, we can see that there's a big opportunity in our farm systems to reduce the level of nitrogen that we've been using. And we're really interested in, reducing the level of chemical nitrogen that we bring into grower crops. We want to reduce the amount of concentrate which contain nitrogen that come onto our farms. But the big one we want to do is to maximise animal performance. And really, we're interested in technologies that will allow us, satisfy those three needs. And the use of legumes, such as red and white clover, is one of them. And it's going to bring on the back of it, beef production system benefits, driven by economics and environmental efficiency. But I suppose, what is the role of legumes, in our beef production systems? And the role of them, can either be predominantly as graze systems, if we're in regard to our white clover, or with red clover, it's very much in a conservation system, and helping achieve, high animal performance over those winter months. And the reason we're interested in forage legumes such as red and white clover is because of their ability to biologically fix atmospheric nitrogen and make it plant-ready available in the soil. And on the back of that, we can reduce our dependence on chemical nitrogen fertiliser in our farm systems if we can achieve that. And if we can, use legumes to support low nitrogen systems, we can get higher herbage production, we can improve the sward quality throughout the year, and on the back of those, we can achieve higher levels of animal performance. But I suppose the first place that we should be focusing is on the grazing sward, which is, the most permanent basis of animals' diet over their lifetime, and the role of white clover, within those grazing swards is massive. But we should look at the indoor winter periods where we're feeding our most expensive diets to our animals, and that's where the role of red clover comes in. To see, can we shorten, that finishing period, or can we get higher average daily gains over that first winter and achieve, better lifetime performance? And there's lots of positives of red clover. And if we look at that ability to biologically fix nitrogen, we know that red clover can achieve, between 200 to 300 kilograms of nitrogen fixation per hectare. So a very, very high level of nitrogen fixation. And, in silage systems, that can mean the elimination of chemical nitrogen application in those systems. And we know from numerous studies, in Ireland and across Europe, that there's a very high dry matter production potential from our red clover silage swards. Greater than 15 tonne, across a 3 to 4 harvest year, and longer in certain cases. And we know from forage legumes, and especially red clover, that they have a very high dry matter intake potential. And on the back of that higher dry matter intake potential, we can see increased levels of animal performance attainable. But I suppose on the back of all those positives, there could be some limitations to a red clover system. And I suppose the big one in an Irish scenario is the lack of flexibility that we have with our red clover swards. We often in our farm systems, we have a very much blended approach to grazing, maybe one cut silage system, whereas with our red clover, because of the plant structural differences, it is more typically suited to silage harvest production and not animal grazing. So that limitation, or tying our hands a little bit in having the option of grazing a paddock, can deter us from incorporating clover into the system. Or if we do choose to go ahead and sow red clover on that, and do expose it to frequent animal grazing, we can drastically reduce the persistency and the economic advantage of that red clover sward. And typically, in comparison to our grass plant, or perennial ryegrass plant, which can, remain highly productive for in excess of 10 years in the sward, red clover is typically of a shorter persistence, and maybe on a 3 to 4 year cycle, in your typical farm system. And as well as that shorter persistence, there probably is a requirement there to offer a 4-year break in between red clover sowings. And that is to break down the build-up of soil-borne pests, as well as the spread of fungal disease that may affect the crop. And I suppose in some of our silage systems, especially at low dry matters, we're dealing with a crop that's potentially high in nitrates. We can come across difficulties in ensiling, if we do not get sufficient wilting conditions or of a very poor level of grass within the sward. But I suppose before all of that, we have to establish the crop. And we're very lucky to have Martin Conley here this evening, who has established red clover into his farm system, and we'll hear from Martin as to why he's chosen red clover, but some of the agronomy and the choice of his paddocks, the methods that he's used, and a little bit of his experience. But I suppose in Ireland at the moment we've no recommended list to identify suitable red clover varieties for use in our own environment. And we strongly rely on the UK recommended list to choose appropriate varieties that offer very stable yields of dry matter and that can persist over multiple harvest years. And I suppose when we're picking a variety very similar to grass, we might pick heading dates that will indicate when those crops are going to flower, when we want to see a drop off in their quality, and when they need to be harvested. And we also have some ploidy differences there with diploid and tetraploid varieties and differences between those in terms of their persistence. But I suppose one of the big ones is when we sow it and the type of seedbed we sow it into. And with all clover crops, look, the spring is the most reliable time. And it's the most reliable time in terms of soil moisture, soil temperature, but the big one is to get the post-management practices put in place, such as spraying, the cleaning off of the herbage at a low cover to allow light penetrate the sward and increase the proportion of clover. And as I said, it should be grown in rotation. But I think we're very fortunate enough, if we sow our red clover with high quality perennial ryegrasses, or even undersow with some white clover, that when the red clover does burn out, which it will, be it 3 or 4 years in, that we have a very productive sward of perennial ryegrass and potentially white clover that can remain productive, in excess of 10 years and write off that cost for reseeding. But I suppose we have to understand the growth habit differences in our plants to understand their differences in management between red clover and white clover. If we look at a red clover plant, we can see it's a very tall erect plant with a very deep taproot structure on it. But it's solitary, it grows from a solitary growing point, and that means that it's more prone to damage, it's more exposed, and when that growing point gets damaged, that plant is gone. Whereas if we look at a white clover plant, that is a stoloniferous growth habit which creeps along the base of the sward, putting down multiple growing points and can regenerate from those. So it's more protected in the sward and can regenerate itself somewhat. So here we've a drone footage from some of our, what I thought was a good clover paddock until we put up a drone and saw what lied in the middle. And we can see, under the same management in that whole environment, that there is, certain conditions that really hamper the persistence of red clover. So we can see in the headlands of the paddock where there's a lot of, machinery passes, heavy trailers, a lot of turning of tractors, etc., and how that's damaging the clover plant and how we see it die out of the sward after a very, very short period of time. And I suppose if we look to the middle of the paddock, and only from chatting to different people, we found out that there was a ditch previously in the middle of the field, and that was removed. Certain clay disturbance, clay brought into the site, and we have to look at, was there stem mealworm or some other parasite or pest, in the soil that has caused, the clover plant to burn out of that area. I'm not sure, but it just highlights, the more complex management that can be associated with red clover, and the probably more diligent site choice that we have to put in place when picking a paddock to sow red clover in. But I suppose, how do we get the best out of our clover crops? it is really best suited to a multi-cut silage system. And really in a multi-cut silage system, to get the best right out of clover, you have to take that first cut very early on. And we look at some of the benefits as to why we want to get that first cut removed. And the big one is we allow light into the sward to benefit our second and third cuts. And also by getting that first cut in earlier, we pull forward that final cut, and we ensure that we're bringing our third cut forward, pulling it back, trying to avoid making late cut silage beyond early September, when we're going to have lower dry matters, poorer wilting, and poorer preservation conditions for our silage. But we want infrequent cuts that allow about 6 to 8 weeks between cutting intervals. And the reason we want to do that, if we look at the picture, we can see the big canopy that's there on the red clover plant. And that canopy intercepts sunlight, and it can take that sunlight and create additional carbohydrates which are stored in the residual and the taproot of the plant, or the crown. And it's that carbohydrate reserve that will help improve the persistence of the plant and fuel the regrowth after the harvesting of that crop. So if we don't allow sufficient time between harvest cuts, we don't fully replenish those carbohydrate reserves. And if we cut, at maybe a month interval, we can deplete and run down those reserves in the plant and reduce the lifetime persistency. Some farmers you hear saying, it's great to let the crop go to flower. It's probably not letting it go to flower, it's not really regenerating that way. It's just that you're allowing enough time between the harvest to replenish the full reserves prior to cutting. But I suppose one thing, and Martin touched on it just chatting to him last week, is about the wilting conditions of the clover crop. We need a wilt, but you have to manage it very quickly to avoid leaf shatter when tedding or raking in the crop. But I suppose you have to trust in the clover plant and trust in its potential. And it's only when we really pull nitrogen out of our red clover systems that we see the true benefits of it. And with the removal of chemical nitrogen applications, we really see an increase in the proportion of red clover in the sward. And we know that at higher clover proportions, we're fixing more nitrogen. And on the back of fixing more nitrogen, we're growing more tons dry matter. And that's really important. So if we spread chemical nitrogen, we suppress the percentage of red clover, we get lower biological nitrogen fixation, and we reduce dry matter production. So really, less is often more in the scenario for red clover. And if we look at some plot work from Teagasc Grange, completed by Dan Clavin, and this is over a 6-year period under a kind of a 4-cut simulated grazing system, we can see that the perennial ryegrass and red clover under a 0 chemical nitrogen application system could support the same level of dry matter production to a perennial ryegrass receiving in excess of 400 kilos of chemical nitrogen. So that's a massive, massive ability and gives us great confidence in our red clover crop. So we're interested in incorporating red clover into our dairy beef system as a component study. And this is the performance from our 2 to 3 year old red clover swards over the last year. We can see that those swards in 2022 produced in excess of 19 tonnes dry matter of between 3 silage cuts and 1 aftermath grazing. But what we can see is the clover proportion across the year is plotted, and we can see from the first cut in May how we increased the red clover percentage up from 38% by removing that herbage and allowing light down into the base of the sward. We get that clover percentage up to 87% for the second cut and 88% for the third cut silages. So that just shows the importance of light, the importance of that early cut. And if we delay that cut any later, we're pushing that third cut out into late September and really making questionable silage, which isn't cheap to do. So I suppose we have to look at, how well does this silage feed? And look, we know all the studies nearly indicate that red clover grass silage has an increased dry matter intake potential. And on the back of that, we can, maintain or even improve animal performance. And it's the chemical and morphological characteristics of the red clover plant that support this higher level of intake and subsequent performance. But just one thing, I suppose I've had a lot of organic producers in the last week sending on silage analysis and different reports, and probably, citing that the feed reports are probably underestimating the feed potential of our red clover silages using some of our crude feed values that we use. And this happens because the way the fibres break down in the red clover plant, as well as the way the protein breaks down. And if we talk and look at the digestibility of the plant, typically red clover silages have a lower digestibility. And that makes sense. If you go back and think of the plant, it's a very tall, erect plant. It takes a lot of fibre to support that structure. But it's the type of fibre that is present in it. And the fibre that is present has a higher level of completely indigestible fibre. But the fibre that is digestible breaks down at a much faster rate. And it's this faster rate of breakdown of the fibres and a reduced particle size of the rumen that causes it to pass through the animal quicker, reducing rumen fill and facilitating that higher intake potential of the animal. And when we look at our protein, so our dietary nitrogen is an indirect measure of our crude protein values, and typically red clover crops are typically higher in this crude protein level, but really the type of protein that is present is what is really important. And the type of protein that is present in red clover goes through certain forms of protection, and that protection can prevent this protein from degrading either in silage bales or in the pit, but most importantly in the rumen of the animal. We don't see this protein broken down in the rumen. We see more of it getting through to the small intestine, where we get greater levels of absorption and diversion into the production of extra animal protein or growth. So sometimes as well from our silage analysis, the crude protein values may appear low, but we must take into account that these are zero nitrogen systems. So we're not, we may be underestimating the true level of protein that is available in some instances. And we can see that from our feed analysis from Teagasc Grange. If we look at our first cut silage and look at the red clover silage, we can see it's coming back at about 12.5% crude protein. Whereas with our perennial ryegrass cut the same day, but managed under a conventional level of chemical nitrogen, we can see that that's a 14% crude protein crop. And that's at a 37% red clover percentage. Whereas if we go forward into our second cut silage, we can see, again, as you'd expect, with 88% red clover, we see a decline in the digestibility. But we see an increase in the crude protein value of that crop on the back of increased levels of red clover. So look, our work going forward is trying to look, we're feeding back these silages in a study this winter and looking at what is the animal response in terms of intake, growth and subsequent growth over the second grading season. But I suppose, what does it mean to the animal? And red clover diets will increase dry matter intake of our animals, and that even despite often lower digestibility. And if we look to some of the last work that was completed on this island on red clover silages was in 1982, and they found that red clover diets over the first winter of dairy beef weanings at the same digestibility to the grass silage could support an additional 300 grams of average daily gain per day. So that is a massive, massive difference. Whereas if we look at our finishing diet, and at a 12% lower digestibility, red clover could support higher intakes and, slightly better or a very similar average daily gain in our finishing animal. But really what we should be focusing on is having high digestibility red clover crops to capitalise on all of the advantages of red clover. So look, we have a research project in place this year, and we're trying to see where is the best response from a red clover silage. Not all our silage is going to be red clover, so do we get a better response from our weanling or from the finishing animal? And I suppose one thing we have to look at is, does it pay us? And Peter Doyle has completed some very thorough feed cost analysis where he's compared a two-cut conventional grass silage system on a per bale basis to a three-cut red clover silage system. And if we just take a direct comparison of the two-cut grass silage system to a 3-cut red clover system using a blend of animal slurry and imported 0730 as the source of nutrition, we could see straight away that there was an economic advantage of €3.30 on a per bale basis. But where we improve the use of our animal slurries and go to an all slurry system, that economic advantage of the 3-cut sided red clover system increases up to €6.30 per bale. And if we could improve the lifespan of that red clover sward up a further 2 years, from 4 years up to 6 years, that could bring that economic advantage of the red clover silage bale up to €8.40 ahead of a grass silage bale. And if we were to see an increase of 25% in fertiliser price, we'd see that economic advantage of red clover silage, increase in excess of €10. However, if we saw a decrease in our chemical nitrogen prices, we'd see, the attractiveness of red clover reduce somewhat in comparison to a grass-only system. So just looking at some of the current research that we have ongoing at Teagasc Grange, be it on the dairy beef side or with Peter on the suckler side, we're interested in agronomy. We're interested in identifying the best varieties for use in Ireland, and we're interested in the role of nitrogen application in our red clover systems. We're looking at dry matter production and the stability of that over time. We're looking at the feed value, what it means to intake, the performance, the conversion efficiency of our animals. And then on a farm system basis, what does it do to the nitrogen balance? Is it economical? What does it mean to the environment? And what's the relative feed cost of red clover to other feedstuffs? So just to conclude, look, there's opportunity to reduce our dependence on chemical aid. And that's going to be facilitated by red and white clovers. And they have the ability, to fix massive levels of chemical nitrogen. And look, there is the potential for improved animal performance. But I suppose that our management will largely dictate if this is realised on commercial farms. And I suppose we're going to hear from Martin about the suitability of red clover, in his bull beef production system where average daily gain is everything, and to displace expensive concentrate out of his diet. What role has red clover, got in helping him support his system objectives? And look, there is going to be increased levels of management. It's primarily focused towards silage production. It's probably more suited to your drier soils that have greater flexibility, but it can result in a lower cost of production. But that cost advantage is dependent on the yield you can get, how long you can sustain that yield over how many years it will persist for, and fertiliser price will also dictate the attractiveness of it. So that's my presentation for this evening. If you have any questions, you can get in contact with myself, or if you have hardware questions, you can get in contact with Peter Doyle, and look, we'll try and answer any of those questions this evening.
Thanks very much, Nicky. Do have a seat, Nicky, and we'll bring up our future beef farmer, Shane Keaveney, and our previous speakers, Paul, Colin and Natasha, and our Dairy Beef 500 farmer, Martin Connolly. So if you'd like to join us on stage here. So maybe just when our speakers are taking their seat there, just want to test out your arms to see if they're working, because I haven't seen too many arms up in the air. So I suppose my first question tonight is, how many farmers here are calving heifers at 24 months old? If you can put up your hands for a quick survey. Okay, so over this side there's a good few more than on this side of the house. And my second question then, maybe see as your arms working over here, how many farmers have used red clover so far on their farms? We have one farmer over here, two down here. And how many farmers have used red or white clover? So the few more has used some white clover or red clover. So we've probably a bit of work to do there, I'd say, Nicky, to convince farmers about the benefits of red clover. Maybe the fact that we're in the west of Ireland, it hasn't quite caught on yet, but I suppose you, as a Galway man, knows our conditions, and maybe I'll bring Martin in here as well. Conditions in the west of Ireland suitable to sowing red clover?
Yeah, look, absolutely. Look, we've seen farms throughout the country where management has put in place can establish really, really good crops of clover and get the full potential of them. Look, I don't think where the geographical location really defines our systems anymore, because we know a lot about the management and how to get the best out of everything. Look, it might create a little bit more difficulty if soil conditions are very wet. You might need the flexibility to get, in late on in the year or early in the year to get maybe things grazed off and allow light into the swards. But certainly, look, I wouldn't be hiding behind your county flag and avoiding putting in legumes or anything like this. But look, you have to know how to manage them. It's the management. 80% of our grass seeds contain some level of white clover at the time of sowing, but yet we don't see it, materialise in the sward 2 to 3 years. And that is all because of the management that is put in place. So we have to manage our swards to promote higher levels of these legumes to get the full benefits. And the benefits on the back of that, can be massive. And look, Martin will probably have some comment on his choice of paddock and why he's put in clover.
Thanks, Nicky. And I suppose we won't be hiding behind the county flag when we meet you in the championship, Nick. I didn't realise you were from Galway, and I won't hold that against you. I chose a field I'm using for silage over a number of years. It's quite a dry field, the most reason I decided maybe to put in red clover was because I depend a lot on good quality silage to finish my bulls, to be an indoor finishing system really when it comes to that stage with them. And I'd be just hoping to get the most I could out of silage in my operation. I have to say that it's been all positive so far. We cut off a crop of grass on the 8th of May, and we gave it a couple of weeks then to green up. And I don't know, will I continue on with my story on this now, just at this stage, or do you want to do something else?
Actually, that was, Martin,
Yeah.
my next question. You're part of the Dairy Beef 500 programme that Teagasc launched today. First of all, it's going to be a very important programme going forward. So just give us a bit of background on your system and why you've joined that programme and what you hope to achieve out of it.
Right. Well, I have about 60 acres of land, or 60 hectares of land, and I suppose there's 2/3 of that rented. So, and it's fragmented, so it's a bit difficult to manage maybe. But I've been in the calf to beef system for a long number of years, and it was kind of nice. Normally when we'd be at discussion groups, I'd be listening to the likes of maybe Shane and other people. It was all suckler farmers really that was around me, so I had nothing really to compare with. And I suppose thanks to Jerry Craig's persistence, I managed to enrol in the Green Acres programme. And I have to say it has been a great experience, and I have to compliment all the advisors there from the top down and the amount of work they're putting into it, and we're really getting a lot of information out of it. And it's great to be able to compare how a person is doing with somebody else, and to see how it's averaging out over the group of people, I buy in dairy bull, all Frisian bull calves of a few local dairy farmers. Usually they're about a month old, and I bring them to bull beef at, I think the last year about 21.5 months was the average slaughter age. Somewhere about 334, 335 or 336 kilos average. So that's a brief.
And there is more about your farm in the booklet that's here on everybody's seat.
Okay.
Perhaps, Paul, if I just turn to you for a moment. The Future Beef programme and the Dairy Beef 500 programme. This is our first national conference since both were launched. Just give us a quick synopsis of both programmes and what Teagasc hope to achieve out of them.
Yeah, look, they're absolutely essential programmes in terms of our overall beef programme. So we have a very detailed research programme at Grange, but essentially unless we can get that information out onto farms, then that research will stay in the research centre, and that's not what we want. So the Future Beef programme is focusing on technologies that will improve the performance of suckler beef farms throughout the country. It follows on essentially from what was the Better Farm programme before that. We have a network of farms throughout the country. We're working very closely with industry. It operates under the umbrella of the Signpost programme, so a big focus as well as on the economic performance of the farms is on the environmental performance. So not just greenhouse gas emissions, although greenhouse gas emissions is obviously really important, but also biodiversity, nutrient management, water quality, and so on. Equally, Mark has mentioned already in terms of DB 500, the Dairy Beef 500 programme, we've seen the expansion of the dairy herd in Ireland, and we see that as a real opportunity for the beef sector. Yes, there are challenges and there are questions around integration, around getting better beef merit in the dairy herd, but we've seen the dairy industry, if you like, stepping up to the plate in some respects in terms of the DB index, now the CBV, so there are opportunities there to provide good beef merit animals from the dairy herd. What we want is now to provide those technologies that Nicky and colleagues in Grange are developing on the dairy beef side to get them rolled out onto farms. Again, it operates under the umbrella of the Signpost programme, so it's economics first and foremost, and 500 is €500 net margin is the target, and that's the target for the national dairy beef industry. For the monitor farm programmes, it will vary depending on stocking rate, but let's say an average of €750 net margin. So that's a really ambitious net margin, but one we see as being very attainable. Indeed, some of the farmers are already exceeding that. So economics is number one, but we also must remain focused on the environmental challenges and the ambition and the legislation we have now to reduce emissions. So both coming hand in hand. So both of the programmes operating under the Signpost, economics and environmental sustainability.
Yeah, and I think the important point there to make is that at both systems you can make a profit farming either your dairy beef or your suckler beef, and there is a profit to be made in a family farm income off them farms.
Absolutely. And if we look at the figures released today, yes, they're sobering in some respects in terms of the overall average, but we know that the beef sector there are many churches in the beef sector in terms of a farm level, from demographic differences to farm sizes to structural differences and so on. But the farmers who are full-time, commercially focused and profit focused, there are a cohort of them that are doing very well in terms of beef production, and we've had evidence of that through our demonstration farm programmes and over the last number of days in terms of farmers who are demonstrating what they are doing. So there is a real focus on economics in both programmes. So both on the suckler side, we are seeing some really good profitable systems there, as well as on dairy beef systems.
Thanks very much, Paul. And maybe we'll turn to Shane Keaveney, who is our future beef farmer here beside me. Shane, just give us a quick synopsis of your farm, why you joined the future beef programme, and particularly, will you just give us something on your calving at 24 months? We've heard so much tonight about it, and you've been mentioned a good few times on it, and tell us, I suppose, how you started calving at 24 months and what your farming system is.
My farming system is, we run an under 16-month bull beef system, and from this year now I'm trying to switch over from selling yearling heifers to bringing them to forward stores or to finish them all together. I joined the future farm primarily for sustainability, from profit sustainability for the farm, to make it profitable for whoever comes behind me. Plus, if as beef farmers we want to go forward and people to buy our meat, we have to prove that we're able to produce beef in an environmentally sustainable way as well. So that was the reason I joined the Future Beef programme. Getting on to the 2-year-old calving, I started my herd in 2014, and again it was profit driven. I wanted to get that heifer producing a calf for me as soon as possible, so calving that heifer at 24 months was that way, and was the only way I could see doing that,
We have some questions in there, Catherine.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions in for Shane. Just in relation to the replacement heifers, how do you select the current replacement heifers that you're calving down 24 months?
The number one focus for me on selecting my heifers is their weight. You pick out a handful of heifers that you'd like to bull, but when I weighed my heifers in mid-April before I start breeding in early May, if they're not heavy enough, you can't bull them, so they have to be 390 kilos plus, and that's my starting point,
And why have you gone to using sex semen this year, and what sires are you using on replacement heifers?
I changed over to a terminal bull, I have a Charlotte terminal bull, so I want to keep more milky cows coming through, so I figured like a herd my size of 37 or 8 cows, I couldn't justify buying a second stock bull, plus having a second stock bull there running with a smaller amount of heifers, it's 50-50, it's a lucky bag whether you're going to get a heifer or not, so I wanted heifers, and that was why.
And do you find you have difficult calvings at 24 months in comparison to the past, and how do you avoid these difficult calvings?
I I don't really have an issue. The bulls I pick out have low calving difficulties and high reliability, the ones I pick from AI. So, say if I calf 7 or 8 heifers down, 5 out of those 7 or 8 heifers might calf on their own, and the other 2 or 3 gentle. It just be there to give them a hand. There's no jacking or no nothing. It's just, there's no great difficulty as far as I can see,
Thanks, Shane.
Okay, thanks, Catherine. Anybody on the floor would like to ask any of our speakers a question? I have a man over here. If anybody else wants to raise their hand, I'll maybe take them in groups of 3.
How you doing? Just in relation to the section of you're using sex semen on heifers to produce future replacements. Now my brother is a sheep farmer, and he's an expression, you never lamb a lamb's lamb. So basically, if you're breeding young, particularly using very easy calving bulls on young heifers in order to avoid calving difficulty, and then expect to produce suitable replacements into the future, is there not a risk that you're going in about smaller and smaller cattle with no growth from that perspective?
That did cross my mind, and in the past I have calved heifers calves, if you know what I mean, from not using sex semen, from using conventional semen, and it is in the back of my mind. So this year, you might have seen from Nicky's slide, or Colin's slide there, that I plan on using more mature cows with sex semen as well this year. It was more or less a bit of a trial in my own farm this year to see how it works, so I plan on expanding it a bit more.
I might just throw that question to Colin as well. You'd have seen a lot of farms, Colin, and you'd have heard that comment before. Can you give me a comment?
Look, I think it still comes back to growth, that will come down to being like a milk issue, but at some stage the calf is going to start consuming grass as well, so even pre-weaning. So if you have good grassland management, you should overcome some of the issues around maybe lower early life growth that might be associated with first calvers. So I think again the issue can be managed.
Okay, it's management. So we have a question down here in the middle, yeah?
Yeah, if you're purchasing in your replacement heifers, is it as necessary to have them calving at 24 months?
Yeah, so I think what your question is the 30-month animal calving. So we've heard a lot about 24-month calving and 36-month calving. So there's a group of heifers here that calve at 36 months, Colin? Or sorry, at 30 months. You want to comment on that?
Look, I suppose at a national level, those animals, they do still exist. Like Paul might even come in on this as well, but he did, I suppose, have figures there about in terms of the impact it has on the environment and both what it's worth to the industry nationally as well. There is still an association because they still exist as an unproductive animal for a longer period of time. If you're buying them in, you're probably going to pay more for them than if you, I suppose, pull your heifer at 15 months of age. The cost still exists.
Yeah, Paul, yeah.
I might just make a comment on that. Yeah, you're either buying an animal for weight, in which case if you're buying at 20 months at the same weight as you would require for an animal breeding at 15 months, then obviously weight for age for that animal has been poorer over its lifetime. So either that's genetically you're buying an animal that is less predisposed to live weight performance, or else something else has happened in terms of the lifetime of that animal. So you would question that approach. Otherwise you're buying a heavier animal, in which case it's probably going to be more expensive. So on an individual farm level, I would certainly question it, and I know most of our replacements are purchased in replacements, and I think that's probably the logic for calving a little bit older. I'm buying her, so I'll buy for weight, but you are paying a little bit more for that animal, or else there's an average lifetime live weight performance. And as Colin has said, if we take a national picture, regardless, there is a cost to that nationally, both economically and from the point of view of emissions. So both of them I would question that.
We have a gentleman down here.
Yeah, I suppose it's for Dr. Crossan. Is it time, I wonder, to relook at the makeup of the economic indexes, the Eurostar indexes, when we see the value of cull cows, what they're making today around the sales ring, and for a lot of farms that are keeping those heavier type of cull cows, they are actually the key profit driver for those farms at the moment.
Look, it just so happens that we are revising the indexes next year, so we do revise them from time to time. But there is an economic issue there in terms of the replacement, but there's also a genetic gain issue, you know. So if you're replacing, what you want is to continue to make genetic progress in terms of the base genetics you have in your suckler herd. If you're replacing at 25%, for example, you're only retaining a cow for 4 years. If you're retaining at 16 to 18%, that's on average 6 years. So you want to retain your cow for as long as possible in terms of maintaining that genetics. Otherwise, what's the point in making your genetic progress? You're trying to make genetic progress, you're trying to have a baseline herd. Equally, in terms of the number of, if you like, heifers you have coming through every year, that has implications for your sire selection. Shane has mentioned already in terms of the ease of calving sires that you want to select. You are going to select easier calving sires in terms of your replacement heifers, and therefore you have implications for that as well. But it is a valid point that, you know, in the beef sector, the suckling sector in particular, where you have you know, very good cull prices, the cost of replacements can be small enough, and we would see that in some cases, that replacement rate is different between 16% on an individual farm. If you have a high cull price, might be small enough, but in terms of a long-term strategy, depending on cull price, to be close to your prime beef price is probably not a great strategy. It happens from time to time, and you do see cycles around that, but in the long term, you always want to maximise your output of prime beef. That will, in the long run, be the most valuable beef that you will produce.
And just finally, I wonder, is it time now? We're all hearing that 5-star cattle are delivered. Some of us don't see it actually on the ground, while some are, they're all are not. Is it time for a full review of the indexes to see that they are actually delivering an independent review?
Well, I mean, in terms of an independent review, I mean, Teagasc are an independent science organisation, you know, so any review that's carried out, we will carry it out independently, if you like, an evidence-based approach. We do work very closely with our colleagues in ICBF in terms of the genetic gains and genetic profile of the herd. So I would see us working together as being an independent review as such. In terms of is it delivering, we have a number of papers where we've looked at 5-star versus 1-star and versus 3-star at a national level. And you know, it has been presented indeed in the 2019 Beef Conference. There was a paper by Andrew Cromie where we looked at 5 versus 1 versus 3 using the BDGP data, and we are very fortunate now that we do have very strong data coming through BDGP, and we can assess both in terms of calf performance, carcass performance, retention within the herd. You know, there is very strong data now to say that those, you know, higher star values are delivering nationally. And I suspect the point is that, you know, on any given farm you might have a 1-star cow that is performing very well and 5-star cows that maybe aren't performing very well. That will happen. There is an interaction obviously between the genetics of the animal and environmental factors that would have happened in the animal's lifetime. But we have to look at this from a national population perspective, and the data is very clear in that respect.
We do have a speaker from ICBF later on. I have a group of young farmers here in the middle. I'm going to take 2 more questions in total. If we get this group, somebody here in the middle wants to ask a question. And also maybe a question for Natasha in terms of what's the future role of Animal Health Ireland, based in Leitrim again, based in the west of Ireland, from what can you do in the future for us as suckler and beef farmers?
So what we did recently is we actually looked at, when we started the organisation 10 years ago, we looked at factors, well, what do the farmers want us to help with? And for example, what came out of that initial process was things like BVD and mastitis. And going forward, we repeated that process 2 years ago, and what came forward are things like lameness and welfare have become important, as well as parasite control. And this year was the first year, for example, that we saw a parasite taser, getting vets on the ground talking to farmers about their parasite control. So hopefully things like that will be something that we can take forward, but we wait and see.
We'll take one more question, we'll wrap it up then.
The question there for Nikki. We've been growing red clover there for a couple of years, and we're fairly sandy soils, and we started growing it primarily to try and improve our soil structure. But what we've noticed over the last couple of years is in the autumn, the ground is very slimy and even mucky. The first couple of showers of rain, it goes to pure slop. Is this going to be an issue down the line? Are we actually doing more harm to our soil structure than improving it due to excess nitrogen being in the soil in the autumn. And is there an issue with nitrogen leaching in the autumn from red clover?
Yeah, look, probably where you might see a lot of that kind of greasiness coming from is maybe in an all slurry type system where you have a lot of slurry been spread across the year. You're probably talking 6,000-7,000 gallons of slurry per acre to satisfy, the offtake of your typical red clover crop. So that's where I suspect a lot of that is coming from. But I think that's probably very much on the surface. I think where the benefits of the red clover come from in terms of soil structure is a little bit deeper down in the profile. And I think that deep taproot structure, probably has an ability to help, maybe reduce some of the runoff. But look, I think it is pretty stable type of nitrate that does come from the red clover crop. We probably do see maybe more of it mineralised in the autumn of the year, and we see massive uptake from our grass crops, especially this autumn, and we see our clover percentage, suppressed back down. So I think where there's grass in the sward, Pat, I think the grass will be able to take up that excess nitrogen that might be mineralised in the back end of the year when you do see it becoming released. We probably would have found the opposite in Grange. Over the last year, we probably found, because of the lack of chemical nitrogen, we probably found a very good structure when we did clean off and graze our red clover crops in the autumn. But maybe we haven't as high levels of slurry spread, and we're only in maybe the second year of that all clover system. So look, we keep an eye on it. But look, I think from a lot of the white clover research studies, there probably hasn't been, an increased risk of nitrate leaching, provided you're growing the tons, you're capturing and utilising a lot of that nitrogen produced.
Yeah, thanks, Nicky. So at that, I'll wrap up our first session. We have a second session coming, but I'd like you to give a round of applause to all our speakers here tonight and our two panelists. And as I say, there is the two programmes running there, and we can follow them two programmes over the next 3, 4, 5 years and see how our farmers get on, and hopefully improve the profitability on all our beef and suckler farmers. So thank you very much, everyone. Thanks to our speakers.
Okay, that concludes the first session, and it was a longer session. Look, I'd like to thank Trevor very much for facilitating and for chairing that last session, and in particular the two farmers also for their contribution at the forum, and also for their papers in the proceedings that you have in front of you. Pierce has just outlined to me that there is the opportunity to give some feedback on the conference, on the one-page card that you have there, so if you want to scan it, there's the opportunity to give feedback on it. Okay, we'll proceed immediately with the second session. Okay, and it will deal with delivering sustainability at farm level. It is going to be a panel discussion, and it will be facilitated by Matt O'Keefe. Matt O'Keefe, I'd like to welcome him. He's probably very familiar to you between his involvement in farm organisations, in print media, and also in radio. So you're welcome, Matt.
Thank you very much. And most particularly of note for my career is that I'm a farmer. First and foremost, and that's the way it's always been, that's the way it always will be. I was particularly intrigued by the musical introduction, and I think it just means, panellists, that you're going to have to sing for your supper big time. I intend making myself comfortable by remaining seated for a short period while we introduce the panel. There'll be no formal presentations, but this is where the interaction comes between you as participants as well as the panellists up here on the stage. Now, if we could start, and I'll let each panellist introduce themselves, starting with you, Sinead. You're a researcher with Teagasc. What are you at these days?
Yeah, so my name is Sinead Waters. I'm a researcher in the Animal Bioscience Department in Teagasc Grange. And I have a real interest in, first of all, I was interested in the rumen microbiome, so microbes that exist in the rumen of the animal. And that really extended then into these microbes produce methane. So really right now I'm interested in methane emissions from ruminants, how we can reduce methane emissions from ruminants, developing methane mitigation strategies that we can ultimately bring to the farm level. So strategies and technologies that we can develop further and bring to the farm level. So at the moment we're developing these in the lab, and also we're testing technologies in beef cattle in Teagasc Grange and in sheep in Athenry also. And really what we want to do is make them implementable on farms. We work closely also with the Signpost programme, as was mentioned earlier, so that we can make these technologies go from the lab to trials and then to be utilised on the farm.
And in terms of methane reduction additives, I assume this is a worldwide research project, that there's huge interaction between the Irish effort and globally.
Absolutely. And I suppose in another role that I have, I'm co-chair of the Livestock Research Group of the Global Research Alliance for Agricultural Greenhouse Gases. And really in that forum I bring issues that are of Irish importance, particularly we're a pasture-based country, similar to New Zealand for example. So really what we want to do is, internationally there's loads of research going on in trying to come up with the same, I suppose, endpoint in developing feed additives that we can apply at farm level. And over the last year really in Teagasc Grange we've made lots of progress. We have increased our capacity to measure methane, first of all, hugely, both in Teagasc Grange and in Tully with the ICBF. So we can actually measure methane now very well in beef cattle. So we're actually trying to get proper baselines for that, and that's really good progress. What we're also doing is we have a large project called Metabate, which I lead, and in that project we're testing, lots of companies and organisations make claims about feed additives. Within this project we're independently assessing these feed additives from the laboratory right through to animal trials. So we can give definitive results to the scientists, to farmers, to everybody on whether feed additives work or not. We've tested things like Bovaer that you may hear about, or 3NOP. We've tested other feed additives from countries, from companies in Ireland and elsewhere, and we're making progress. The area where we really want to push out at the moment is trying to make these feed additives applicable in pasture-based. So really, as mentioned earlier, our ability to grow grass in Ireland and to use pasture as part of our feeding system is our advantage here in Ireland. So any feed additive that's going to be applicable here in Ireland will have to be able to apply it during grazing systems. And that's where a lot of the work is going on at the minute. Progress we've made, we've tested 3NOP, Bovaer, that has reduced methane emissions indoors for us by 30%. So that has been tested around the world. This was the first trial that was carried out on the island of Ireland, and that was very, very successful. But this is essentially a powder that needs to be mixed into a TMR diet. So really, and you cannot really get it into a pellet in the current format. So we're looking at this additive and other feed additives, trying to get them into a concentrate or a nut that you can actually deliver it on farm. And we're making progress. There's certain feed additives from Irish industry partners where we can, using an additive called calcium peroxide type feed additive, which has given us similar results. And we can actually get it into a nut and deliver that quite easily on farm. So we're pushing that out in a minute.
Okay, we'll delve into that further over the next half an hour. You mentioned interaction with ICBF and Tully, brings me nicely on to the next panellist right beside me here. I'll have to tell you who he's not, first of all. For anyone that knows Andrew Crummy, that's definitely not Andrew Crummy. That's Ross Evans. He's an ICBF geneticist. I've practiced that since you told me what you were. And there's an awful lot of work going on in terms of how breeding can reduce emissions from the Irish herd, but on an economic basis. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, and I suppose, look, there was a couple of comments from the audience about whether, it's timely now that there's a revision of the Eurostar indexes, and I think it is that time. And I suppose, look, the last 6 years has been, we saw the BDGP scheme, and there was a reluctance there then to change the goalpost until that scheme had finished. But there's a lot of initiatives coming forward, and I suppose one of the themes I picked up on today was, the first one was the age of slaughter piece and how we're trying to make progress driving down the age of slaughter. Well, one of the key additions that we will see coming in later in the year is an age of slaughter breeding value coming in as a new component of the index. So that will start to reward the earlier finished animals that can get in on spec, and so that's kind of a key one. Both has an economic impact but also a carbon impact. So if you can use that then to breed animals that will drive down the genetic merit for age of slaughter, but also the phenotypic level. The other initiatives that are coming, as Sinead mentioned, is the potential advent of a carbon index later in the year. So both the terminal index and the replacement index. As some of you might know, it was launched in November on the dairy side, and it'll be launched in January on the dairy beef side. But Paul is working hard there on the revision of the economic values that are going into the terminal replacements, but also the calculation of the carbon values that are going to identify the key traits that are driving carbon in the index. I suppose all that then can be validated by the data that's over in the Tully Research Centre. I suppose at this stage there's somewhere near close 1,300, 1,400 animals gone through, and worldwide it's probably the largest multi-breed data set that's gone through. And there's some really interesting data coming through from that. We can see big variation within breed and across breed, and the relationships there with traits like feed intake and live weight. They're all giving us an idea as to how methane is being produced on a typical finishing unit. What we need to do now is to replicate that at grass. So see how do those animals perform in terms of their methane emission at grass before they come into Tully, but then extend it to the cows, extend it to the suckler cow, which I suppose is the biggest carbon sink there in the sector. So I mean, we would see that, you know, that there are two big changes coming then in terms of the indexes for later in the summer next year. But the other one I was picking up on was a lot of discussion on age at first calving. And I suppose, look, it struck me that there's probably two traits already in the index there that we're not really utilising because they're probably not up front and central. And the two of them are, there is an actual trait there for age of first calving. There's also a trait there for maternal calving difficulty. And we would have seen examples of those that were probably good in maybe the age of first calving, but then didn't have maternal calving difficulty and ended up leading to a lot of heifers being culled after their first lactation. So there's probably, you know, something we can do there maybe to try and bring those traits up front and central for anyone that is thinking of making a drive for that 24-month at first calving.
Okay, Ross, just as an overarching comment from you perhaps, we know there are any number of heritable traits that can be pursued, but is there, to what extent are they achievable? What's the cut-off point where it's not worth pursuing it because you wouldn't get enough of a bang for your buck?
Well, I mean, if we look at the full range of traits, let's say, that are in the replacement index, they'll range from a very heritable trait like feed intake and carcass weight, at somewhere 40-50% heritable, down to a trait like female fertility, which might be 2 or 3%. And that's literally a function of how many animals you need to get a reliable proof. So if an animal has 100 carcass records, you get a quite high reliability there. You might need 2,000 female fertility records because the heritability is so low at 2%. But you will get reliable bulls once you have a lot of records on them. So it just means that you plan the breeding program so that when you're testing young sires that they get good coverage so that you get enough of daughters coming through the system.
Okay. Dr. Dominique Kroll, we haven't met earlier, you're a late arrival, all the way from Wexford.
All the way from Wexford, yes.
Delighted you could make it, absolutely.
Just as well I had a 4x4.
Yeah, well, things like that rough out there now. The Wexford people are always complaining about the weather. Listen, you have a range of analysis and research results. Take me through 2 or 3 of them.
Okay, so I think probably what's of interest and what you're alluding to is the MAC analysis. So kind of, you know, what I call a benchmarking really of when we take a number of mitigation options that we've worked on collectively in Teagasc, be it in Johnson Castle where I'm based, or colleagues elsewhere, And these are measures that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, that reduce ammonia emissions. And really, we take that all these component research, and we put them together into an analysis which is really benchmarking. It's looking at how much mitigation we can achieve with a certain measure, and what is the cost associated with it. So it really, that kind of higher level analysis identifies the measures with the highest potential. So kind of all the low hanging fruit that that can be maybe prioritised for farmers and for policymakers. These type of analysis also tell us that perhaps some measures are very good, but they need a little bit of a support on the financial side. So what we see is the kind of cost benefit analysis really of each measure, and there's a suite of measures there on both greenhouse gas and ammonia side. Some of them are the same, some of them differ a little bit. But really at the core of it is, there's a lot of measures that save farmers money, that they make financial sense on the farm. Things like, breeding better animals and improving health. So what we've heard already, this evening with regards to a lot of research, these are also mitigation measures that, that reduce our carbon footprint, that reduce our ammonia emissions. So our big things that that can be implemented are low emission slurry spreading, or taking up protected urea, changing that fertiliser formulation to low emission fertilisers. So there's a huge range, there's a range of mitigation measures there, and really what we've been working on, and what my research focused on over the last few years is one, that component research, specifically for myself on the nitrogen side, nitrogen use efficiency, and measures associated with that, and then really bringing it a step further and kind of having that document that is then taken up by the industry, by policymakers, and it's really a guidance document for how to move forward with regards to more sustainable systems.
Protected urea and less low emission slurry spreading, I would suggest highly practical, highly economic, beneficial. They're on the positive side of the balance sheet. At this stage, at this early stage in Ireland, but a mature stage right across the globe, and particularly Europe, anaerobic digestion, where's that on the profit and loss?
That's an interesting one, because there's, as a measure, there's so much to it. Because a lot of the measures that we look at is it's a component of the system, whereas AD, you can look at it as a number of components, or you can look at it at a system level. Okay, so we're talking about provision of feedstocks and sustainability of growing those feedstocks, which we're currently researching at the moment, and improving the kind of biomethane yields within the AD process, which we're also working on. Then there's a whole recycling of digestate, and again we're looking at emissions associated with it. And then there's there's a whole kind of provision for the industry in terms of where to grow feedstock, how to move it around, what's the transport options, how far from the plant it can be, what size of the plant it's kind of is preferable, whether the plant produces biogas, biomethane that is then used, maybe in trucks or kind of injected into gas grid. So there's just AD is such an interesting and fascinating kind of fast-growing area at the moment. There's so many moving levers that it's very hard to kind of give a definite answer, which is probably not what you want to hear.
Well, I do want to get into, not immediately, but I do want to get into the practicalities of where farmers can be involved, and we'll get some interaction on that. But I want to bring in our final panelist, first of all, Pierce Kelly. Pierce, research, development, adoption is the big issue, always has been across all the sectors. Where are we with the likes of the the MAC curve initiatives.
Yeah, so you're 100% right, Matt. You know, Sinead has talked about, and Ross and Dominique and our earlier speakers talked about all the different technologies that can be brought out that will help us reduce our emissions, and that's great. But there's an assumption, in the MAC curve too, that there'll be a big uptake of these technologies. So we really do need to get an uptake of these technologies, because it's one thing saying on paper that reducing the age of first calving has a significant impact and can reduce by X, Y, or Z. But if we're only at 24% of the national herd calving down of heifers calving, first calving at 23 to 26 months, we need to significantly ramp that up. And it was really interesting, I think, the figures Paul put up there, that the impact of moving 50,000 heifers from 36 to 24, and it's those kind of seismic shifts that we're going to have to see in the next 5 to 6 years if to achieve the target that the director was talking about earlier on of 25%. But there is movement, and then we even take, and the director was talking earlier on about, the National Farm Survey results. And part of the National Farm Survey results for the last number of years is looking at the uptake of technologies. And if we look at, say, even what Dominique was talking about there, on the dry stack sector alone, so 25% of the slurry that's spread now on dry stock farms is from low emission slurry spreading. And that's obviously a huge increase since 2015, when the technology wasn't really being spoken about. If we look at the 2021 figure for protected urea on dry stock farms, it's much higher than dairy farms, where there's a lot more urea spread per se anyway. But on dry stock farms, the figure was 2%. Okay, but that was 2021. I would argue that it's really only probably in the last 12 to 18 months that we as an organisation and farmers and the print media and everybody has started to talk about, and the availability of protected urea is a big thing. So I suspect when we see the 2022 figures that 2% will be a lot higher. Then the other big one that we're seeing, and there hasn't been a huge amount of talk about it here this evening, but liming is a big one that has a kind of huge influence. So, if you look at things like protected urea, will probably have a much bigger influence and a much bigger impact when it's uptake on dairy farms, where there's an awful lot higher use of nitrogen, whereas on dry stock farms, a lot of people here in the audience are maybe only putting out 50, 60 units of nitrogen per acre, or 50, 60, 70 kilos per hectare in the year. So there's not going to be a huge, massive benefit on the say protected urea, the impact on dry stock farms. But where there would be a big impact is the greater use of, say, lime, because you can have a significant more grass growing, obviously, with all the benefits of putting out lime and much better nutrient use efficiency. And we see from the National Farm Survey again that in that 5-year period we have seen an increase from, I think it was 15 to 20% in the 5-year period of the use of lime. But again, it's still only 21% of farms putting out lime. And lime is something that it's not really something that you'd say is optional, like nitrogen, that you'll push grass production, I'll put out nitrogen or I won't put out nitrogen. Lime is something that, we're told that, as rain comes, it washes, basically makes soil more acidic. So the vast majority of farms do need to put out lime. It's not something that the 80% who don't put it out have decided that their farm doesn't need it. And we've seen, if you go back to the 60s and 70s, I think the figure we were putting out, and I'm open to correction on this, I think we're putting out close to 2 million tonnes of lime, whereas we were back there for a long time at 1 million tonnes. So our soils haven't changed since the 60s. If anything, we need more lime. We should be getting closer to that 2 million tonnes. So it's impacts like that we need to see start to happen at farm level if the improvements that Dominique is talking about and the mitigation factors that the MAC curve has shown us can get us. Otherwise, it's going to be very hard to get to that 25%.
Okay. Let's just pick out protected urea as an instance where you can get a big hit. It's practical, assuming there's availability, assuming it's price competitive. Bang can.
Yeah, that's been said. Listen, that's a policy issue. That's not something that Teagasc is going to necessarily take a stance on. But I mean, I don't know that we need to go that far even, Matt. I think what it is, and it's around nutrient management planning, and it's around, listen, call a spade a spade. There's a fear on a lot of dry stock farms over the years that urea wasn't as good as can.
And there's absolutely no research, all the research has shown that they're exactly the same. So there's even that level of, we talk about a fear of going and calving heifers at 2 years instead of 3 years. There was a fear all along of moving from CAN to ordinary urea, and now we're asking dry stock farmers to take a little bit more of a leap of faith. Don't just jump to urea, jump to protected urea. So it's around education, it's around training, and it's around giving people the confidence. And I mean, that's where I suppose coming into the Future Beef and the Dairy Beef programme. I mean, you can ask any of them, there's plenty of participants here this evening who are in those programmes, and they have moved to that, and 100% will tell you, listen, they're growing every bit as much grass with the protected urea as they grew with their can-based products. But it's seeing is believing that. And it's easy for us as research organisations or an advisory service to send out a fact sheet or tell you in a newsletter. But really at the end of the day, for you to be convinced, you need to dip your toe in the water, put out some of it, see what happens, and convince yourself. And that's really what we're asking farmers to do on the technologies, whether it's protected urea or calving heifers at 2 years of age. Some of the people on the calving heifers at 2 years of age, it's very unusual for someone to go from 100% calving 3 years to 100% calving at 2 years. But they might try 3 or 4 heifers and say, you hear Shane there talking about, he's no calving difficulties. And that doesn't come around by accident. He's no calving difficulties because he's using AI and he's using easy calving bulls of a high reliability. So he's using the technology, but he's using his brain to think about it.
Okay. Let's see what our conversation is provoking in the audience. Hands up who wants to ask a question. Let's get some interaction. Down at the back. It wouldn't make me walk all the way back here. Right, take it away.
Thanks, William. Sorry, I've actually got two slightly separate questions. One is in relation to the methane, the thermal fermentation. Given that it's microbes in the stomach that causes the methane to be produced, how does the cow's genomic makeup affect that population? Should we be genotyping the microbes, not the cows? On a second point, this is to Ross. Just given the statement you made earlier that age of slaughter is going to be introduced in the next evaluations, and given that for the last 5 years we've been focused on feed intake instead of feed efficiency. Now, feed efficiency is feed intake by output. So we've been ignoring the output and we've been using the feed intake and penalising aggressively fast-growing cattle that have high intakes per day. Has the index actually been pushing us in the wrong direction for the last 5 years?
Okay, 2 questions. Sinead, you start it off.
Yeah, no problem. That's a very good question. You're right. It is actually the group of microbes called methanogens that produce the methane in the rumen of the animal. And we have great expertise in that area of rumen microbiology. So what we are doing is both genotyping the animals as well as looking at the sequence or the microbes, who's in there and what they're doing in the rumen of the animal. So we're doing that work. And we were collaborating with ICBF in 2 big projects, EU projects, where we have now both looked at the genotypes of the animals and also the rumen microbes in over 1,000 animals. And we're looking to see if we can find microbes in the rumen that can serve as very good proxies for methane emissions, so it prevents us having to do long methane runs, but also that we can learn more about the process of methane production and then go about inhibiting it. And that's the basis on how, I suppose, the most promising of the feed additives are working. That's how they study those microbes in depth, and they generated feed additives that would actually block methane production in the active site of those microbes. So that research is actively ongoing in Grange. We have excellent facilities and laboratories in the Animal Bioscience Department to study the microbes in the rumen using genetic technologies. And it's an excellent question. We're also doing that work as well as genotyping. So it goes hand in hand and looking at those interactions.
Ross, add to those 2 questions or those comments.
Look, to pick up the first one on the methane, Sinead mentioned there that there's likely interaction between the rumen, the microbes in the rumen and the genotype in the cow. And what we have seen, without knowing anything about the microbes, that we can see a heritability of about 9% or 9 to 10% just looking at the cow genotypes. So we can see that it's genetically heritable when you look at it from the cow perspective. And hopefully when we overlay the rumen microbes on it, you might get another kick. On the second one, Emmanuel's question around feed intake and feed conversion efficiency. Well, the terminal index evaluates an output trait, which is the trait that most farmers are paid on in terms of carcass traits, carcass weight, conformation and fat. And the feed intake that's evaluated fully represents the input trait. Now, we can talk about feed conversion efficiency was a metric that was used in performance test centres from 20 years ago, when you were evaluating young bulls that were going to go on and subsequently become stock sires. But in the context of where the indexes are being driven, it's based on the widely available commercial data that we know is an output from farmers' herds, which is the carcass data, versus the feed intake data that's gone in, the cost of production to get that carcass to there.
Just to clarify my question, you're saying that the current index, for example, it looks at the feed intake for a 400 kilo carcass, right? But there's a huge difference in getting a 400 kilo carcass at 16 months, for example, than getting it at 20 months. At the moment, you're treating both of them as the same. So you're looking at the output, but you're not allowing for the actual time it got to that point. So, for example, if you've got a bull, for example, there are two animals in Tully. One is doing 3 kilos a day. Let's make it simple. On 10 kilos, and one is doing 2 kilos a day on 7. Well, the reality is that the one who's doing 3 has got a better feed efficiency, even though he's got a higher intake. And that's the point you're trying to make. So the fact that you haven't been taking into account the age of slaughter, you're saying that if the output is a 400 kilo carcass after 200 days, or a 40 kilo carcass after 100 days on trial, it's the same difference.
So just to clarify there, the carcass evaluation that we run corrects for age. So it's a carcass trait adjusted for age. What we're talking about here is a separate trait picking up new genetic variation that allow you to get to the same carcass for 2 bulls. Genetically, you might have a carcass weight of plus 30 kilos, we'll say. The one might have an age of slaughter 10 days earlier than the other, which means that you're getting into the savings that were there in terms of not having to have that animal on the farm for more. So we're talking about a trait here capturing new genetic variation, and it's going to be pushed in. So we're going to end up with carcass weight and age of slaughter in the same terminal in the new terminal index, hopefully by the end of next year.
Okay. Catherine, any questions coming through there that we might cover?
Yeah, there's a few coming in, Matt. In relation to protected urea, is there any version of protected urea that can be spread on land that has a high sulphur content?
Dominique,
I could probably take that one, but to be honest with you, protected urea, I'll put my hands up that I'm not an agronomist, so there are probably some of my colleagues in Johnston that would be better to answer that question. But from what I know, we haven't necessarily seen any problems with relation to sulphur. So protected urea, would be very same as straight urea or can. So you would spread that fertiliser in the same way on high sulphur soils. So from that perspective, I don't think that would really be a problem. Now, in terms of the only issue really with protected urea is you can't get it in an NPK product, but that's kind of that's fairly known. Where whether there hasn't really been any issues with sulphur.
Okay, again, Catherine.
In relation to the commercial beef value, the CBV, what information is there available on that in relation to calves?
Yeah, so I suppose to the rest of the audience who mightn't be aware of it, there's a new index going to be launched for commercial cattle, which is akin to the terminal index but without the calving traits, because when an animal is on the ground and it has already expressed all those calving traits, so it's going to reflect the genetic merit of the animal for the remaining life traits, such as the carcass traits, such as the intake, such as the docility. So the plan there is that it will be available on herd profiles, but it'll also be shown on the mark screens, but only for genotyped animals on the mark screens, so you can have a confirmation of parentage there. So So farmers will be able to access it through their herd profiles for all animals, but it'll be available in the marks for genotyped animals only for the moment.
As an add-on, Ross, in an ideal world, every calf or every animal that enters the mart would be genotyped and available, the data available on the screen.
Yes, you're right. And look, what will be done is it will be categorised into the group of animals that is relevant to us. So you'll have dairy Frisian bulls that are, ranked from a 1 to 5 star within that category. Then you'll have your dairy beef, which will be your Angus, your Hereford, your Limousin off dairy cows. And finally, you'll have your suckler animals. So what it'll do is reflect the genetic merit for the profitability traits that are remaining in that animal's life all the way to slaughter.
Yeah, and the sooner we get to mass adoption of that technology, the better. Hold your thoughts for a second, Catherine.
Sorry, just on the microbes and the ruminating in there, there's something I was often wondering. If the cow drinks water from a trough and it's treated with chlorine, does that not kill the microbes, or how does she get over that?
There's really, they don't, because they're very resistant essentially. So there's no real evidence or research on that, but the microbes in the rumen are extremely resilient. And even if there's small changes over kind of if they're treated with something, they actually bounce back quite quickly. And that's often the basis. Even the feed additives have to be fed all the time to the animals to reduce methane emissions. But chlorine is not necessarily targeted at methanogens or the microbes that we're particularly interested in this case.
Adam Woods, how's the conversation going so far?
Going good, Matt. Going good. Ross, I suppose we're over here in the west. We're in the home of the continental suckler cow. You mentioned the introduction of a carbon sub-index. Could that spell the end of continental sucklers here in the west of Ireland, or is there a risk that that new carbon sub-index, it's going to push us to smaller dairy cows? Will it push us to smaller suckler cows? And one for Pierce as well, on 2-year-old calf. Have we got to the stage, like we've really failed this, I suppose, for 10 years, right? We've not made progress. Farmers on the ground haven't made progress. We've seen you mentioned less, we'll say, advice to farmers adopting that. A lot of that was due to loss and getting paid in loss to spread your story with a low emission storage spreader. Do we need to go to a situation where we start paying farmers to calve a 2-year-old and provide some incentive within a SCEP scheme or a Beak Best scheme to calve a 2-year-old, and just it'll happen then? It's not happening at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Adam of Irish Farmers Journal. Pierce,
Yeah,
take
that and then give Ross a break for a minute. Yeah, listen, you're 100% right, Adam. It's something that we've seen very little progress on over the last 10 years. It's kind of gone up and gone down, but it's kind of hovered around that kind of. We probably took a jump 5-6 years ago from a kind of a 3-year-old, an average of about 15% up to 23%, and it's kind of stubbornly stuck there for the last 5-6 years. You're right. Schemes like the BDGP, when they came in, I know some people were uncomfortable with the idea that they had to have 4- and 5-star cows and they had to start learning up on the indexes and that. But what it did do, it means that 7 years on, because people were being paid to be in the scheme, they're a lot more educated now on what it means to be a 4 or 5-star cow and what the indexes are made up on that. So anything that will help from a point of view of incentivising moving to 2-year calving, I think, we'd be positive towards it. And then really, if it's in a scheme like that and people are kind of being incentivised towards moving towards it, that's where really our role as a Teagasc advisors come in to show people then, like similar to this evening, where, Colin stood up there, Shane stood up there and said, don't be afraid, this is how you do it, these are the key components, these are the key targets, the key KPIs you need to meet, and we'll work with farmers along the way there. So maybe it's an opportunity before the suckler cow efficiency programme that's coming out next year. Maybe there's still an opportunity within that to design something into that.
But that is the health warning. Incentivising calving at 24 months carries the risk that people will do it with immature animals, with small frames, with low, suboptimal weight, and taken as read. That's not what we're looking for, Ross.
Yeah, okay, and respond to Adam's question, and look, it is a very valid question, and I suppose, look, We mentioned there that the economic values in the index are probably 6-7 years old at this stage, and we know that beef prices gone up. So on one side, we're probably going to see an increased weighting on the output traits such as carcass. But on the other side, then you'll have feed costs will probably have gone up as well in the index. So until until Paul has finished his modelling work on the economic values, we won't know the extent. But on the carbon side as well, we'll have to factor in the cost of carbon in the context of the emissions from that particular cow, and how a larger cow is rating there relative to a smaller cow. I would say, if you look at what was the biggest influencer of the carbon index in what we launched in the dairy, was actually fertility. It's the ability of the cow to go and calf early, have a short calving interval, and last in the herd. Because what that means then is there's less replacements needed for the dairy herd going forward, and the same corresponds into the beef herd. That if we have very good fertility in the herd, we have less replacement rate, and therefore we can have more beef output. So I would say, the indicators I would imagine will follow suit, and we'll see that fertility is going to have a big influence on the carbon cost that's going to be factored in.
Next question.
Just changing the subject somewhat, but I think we need to bring a focus back insofar as that the specially selected meat cuts in the supermarkets, some of those have been very successful because of the taste and eating quality of the meat. And consumers are talking about that, just like they would a good bottle of wine or whatever. Just like Kerrygold is attaining twice the price on the supermarket shelf in the States. Do we need to think more about taste and eating quality so that we can get more from the marketplace? Because if you want cheap meat, you can have pork or chicken.
No, that's a major subject going on at the Teagasc Meat Centre, I think. Unless there's someone in the audience, Pierce.
Yeah, you're 100% right. It's something that we've put a huge amount of focus on over the last 10, 15, 20 years. From all of that, and I don't work on the research side, and Sinead or anybody else or Paul or any other researchers can come in here, there's no problem. But there's never, if you look at any of the research trials that we carry out in Teagasc Grange, invariably an awful lot of that, there's taste panel work done on in terms of the meat cuts. So if you go back and look at all the, say, bull beef work that we would have done over the years, you look at a lot of the work that Aidan Maloney has done, and now there's a Meat Technology Ireland. There's a huge amount of work being done there in terms of taste panels and the influence of different diets, different systems, whether it's bull beef or steer beef or heifer beef, and different systems, whether it's short slaughter or later slaughter. All of those trials now, and for a long number of years now, have had a taste component built into them, and a tenderness and all of that. So a lot of that work is being done.
I appreciate that, Pierce. Translated into a bonus, into a premium. How far are we away from being able to sell that?
Yeah, listen, there's probably people again from the markets that come on here and tell you, listen, I suppose the disadvantage we're at in this country compared to, say, other countries is that we're exporting over 90% of the beef. So we're dependent on what that market requires. And at the moment, there's not a huge market signal coming back in terms of, say, if you go to other countries where maybe marbling might be a lot more important, say you go to the likes of Australia and that, but they have a huge home market. And they've built a pricing system around, say, the level of marbling that's in our beef. Whereas the system we have in this country is around the EU ROP, the scale there, and we've built our system around the grade and around a level of fatness and that. That's not to say, and again, maybe Ross can come in terms of, say, meat eating quality. There's a huge amount of work done in the indexes also on meat eating quality and that work there. So maybe Ross, if you want to.
Briefly, Ross.
Behind the scenes has been a project there to get breeding values for three sensory traits: tenderness, juiciness, and flavour. So for anyone who's been bored over Christmas, they can go onto the ICF website, and there's a file of AI sires up there. You'll be able to see the rating. So and it'll be the same as what's there for other traits. We didn't breed or crossbreed, so plenty of variation in there, and it's not all Angus and Hereford the top either, so that's good for the other breeds as well. So that's bringing, I suppose, a bit more science than just saying that because it's Angus, it's Hereford, it gets a bonus.
Okay, I have several questions on my right. Just before I go to them, bear with me. Dominica, you mentioned the feed sources for anaerobic digestion. Where's it going to come from? Well, we know it can come from slurry. It's anticipated to come from food waste. Grass is in that mixture there. How viable is the prospect of farmers growing grass for an anaerobic digester?
I think it's very viable, and I think it's paramount that it's there, because food waste on its own is not going to fuel the big AD industry that we're hoping to develop in the next number of years. Like, the government has a big target in terms of developing the industry and delivering on biomethane, kind of indigenous biomethane in Ireland. So in order to do that, food waste can't do it on its own, slurry won't do it on its own. It really is in combination with grass. And that's something that we know really well. That is our advantage, that we can grow grass very well in this country. And that's something that, it's a land use that is predominant in Ireland, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel and learning a completely new skill. So I think that resource is already there. Now, there are certain components to that system that are just something that we need to be aware of in terms of this needs to be a very sustainable feedstock. So what it means is, it really needs to reduce emissions compared to fossil fuels. So when we produce the biomethane, it's truly sustainable. So in order to do that, when we think about grass being the feedstock, it means that we need to reduce emissions associated with growing of that feedstock. So what goes in, and really the main component that produces emissions at that level is synthetic fertiliser. So that's what Nicky was talking about in terms of red clover is really important, and how it can reduce our nitrogen use. And at the same time, red clover, actually, in combination of red clover with grass, have been seen to produce better biomethane yields in comparison to perennial ryegrass. We're also looking at a number of different species, so not only grass or grass in combination with clovers, but we're talking at a mixed species swords that might also deliver very good yields for the AD feedstock. So I think we have a lot of know-how. There are some questions remaining, but we're working on them. I think the time is now to capitalise on the opportunity that we have on our hands. The target for biomethane is there, and let's face it, I don't think the government really and Ireland can deliver on it without farmers. So we're in a position where where we can really say, yes, we're a part of the solution here, and we play a role, and we want to be involved in that industry and take advantage of it.
We won't get into whether it should be a co-op organised system or venture capital funds or banks or whatever. But there is the potential for it to be a circular economy. Farmers grow the grass, put it into the digester, out comes energy and digestate, and the digestate can go back on the land as a fertiliser. Okay, how about, just before you get there, how about a hands up, how many people, if it were economically viable, if the figures added up, how many of you would consider growing grass for an anaerobic digester? Okay, that's good. Catherine?
Just about the protected urea. Is it the case that the protected urea, if it's not put out in ideal conditions and if it's on the ground for 4 days, that you might as well have used ordinary urea? And I just want to ask another question there. How far are we away from a bolus to be given to cattle? You've mentioned about the feed additive, that that you're heading for a pelleted form that could be fed to cattle, but How far are we away from maybe a bolus being given to cattle that can be given at pasture?
Okay, well, I'll start. Yeah, no problem. So I suppose in the last few years we've got to the stage where we can actually put some feed additives into a pellet now, which is a real advancement. In terms of the bolus, where that research is really just starting now, we'd hope to have, say, feed additives available, particularly for indoor systems, by 2025, that target. But it's really that stage from 2025 to 2030 that should have boluses available for feed additives. But the research is going on in that area.
Any further comment on that? No? You're okay? Next question.
Protected urea.
Sorry, yes, hold on. Yes.
The protected urea, so a very quick one. No, it's not going to break down within 4 days and release the same ammonia emissions. So the protection on urea, where there's a few different compounds, but they will slowly kind of degrade in the soil for within kind of around 2 weeks or even a little bit longer. So you do have that window of opportunity that it's not going to be straight away. That if the granule is sitting there on the ground for a couple of days, that it's going to be a complete disaster. So I would just kind of like people not to have those worries. But I think kind of a larger issue around it is just spreading fertiliser at the time that is best suited. So where we might see a granule sitting on the ground for a prolonged time is if we spread in conditions where there's very little soil moisture. So if we're already in nearly drought conditions or in drought conditions, or and when there's not enough moisture for that fertiliser to actually be incorporated into the soil. And I think we need to ask ourselves the question of, well, are these the conditions to spread fertiliser in? Because at that stage it doesn't really matter what type of fertiliser we'll be spreading. It's not the limiting factor for the growth. It's actually the moisture that might be limiting. And I have seen it on our own farm, where I saw granules of fertiliser a good few weeks after spreading that they weren't all washed into the ground. And I was talking to my husband saying, well, why did you spread fertiliser at the time? It wasn't the best time to spread at all, and he had to agree.
We're back to management change as much as level of input.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, just
timing, weather conditions, everything.
Just common sense around what's the best time to do it, or should I be doing this right now?
Okay.
It's about ranch having excellent facilities, and then farmers on the ground having no facilities. It's nearly like it's come to the time now where Jesus is looking for a manger to be born, and we're lost a certain number, and there's not a bloody word about it. They're talking about the beef edge. There's no edge when you're at the bottom. It's 1,000 days in my cow's calf. So you're talking about either facility or you can't farm. So when Matt asked, what about selling your grass to digestion, that's all you can do, because when you don't have facilities. Thanks.
Yeah, there is a real question there, isn't there, Pierce, around if you haven't got the infrastructure, how do you make the management changes? How do you make the profits to pay for the management changes, even if ultimately there's an economic gain?
Yeah, listen, it's a good point. You stand back and you look at a lot of the technologies we talk around, say, grazing infrastructure or improving, say, animal health, and that, around the grazing infrastructure, or around, say, talking about putting in paddocks and putting in fencing and putting in water systems and that. But there's a cost benefit, really, I would say, to a lot of those things. And yeah, it's probably a cash flow issue as much as anything. And what I mean by a cost benefit is, we see there on some of our farms that we go out, whether they're demonstration farms or just clients' farms, where we go in and we talk about putting in a system, and you could be looking at 4,000 or 5,000 in terms of putting in a very basic fencing system and, say, a water system and that. But on a cost like that is that the payback is very quick. You know, that we see there that, you know, you can grow an extra tonne of grass dry matter, which is worth €100 per hectare, from having a good grassland management versus a poor grassland management in 1 year. You know, and we see the payback on some technologies and some investment very, very quick, a year, 2 years. We talk about, say, improving, you know, breeding and suckler cows and that, and there's a cost in all those things. But again, the payback on them. The handling facilities one, you might say, well, what's the payback there? Well, the payback there is, you know, reduced labour, but probably more importantly, and it hasn't been touched here this evening, is from a health and safety point of view. The big payback one there is, you know, it could save your life, and we've heard of, and I'm sure there's plenty of stories here in the audience of people that have had misses or near misses or maybe unfortunately fatalities on family or friends' farms and that. And that's where the facilities ones come in. I suppose we're lucky from the point of view there, if we stand back and look at, say, TAMS grants and that, there's really good grants there for the last couple of years, and those TAMS grants hopefully be there for the next number of years. And I'd say, you know, talk to your advisors about what those grants are, because they don't pay for it all, and there's nothing that's going to pay 100%, but there is a significant enough grant there for facilities. But it does come down in a lot of cases, you say, Matt, to cash flow. So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg. You need to be making the money to put the investment in, and the investment will make you money, and it's a kind of a slowly catching monkey as you improve the farm. And I suppose the other thing is that, you know, we stand back and we talk about net profits and family farm income and that, but you do have to put aside a certain amount of the income that's coming from any farm in terms of consistently improving and upgrading the farm. And I suppose what disappoints us sometimes from an advisory point of view is where money sometimes is spent rather than where it should be spent. And quite often it's spent on machinery and different things like that maybe aren't as critical on a farm as infrastructure. And I include handling facilities in the infrastructure then.
Yeah, no simple solutions, but ultimately, I mean, there's many a young man or woman starting off with nothing, and then, you know, you build up incrementally over time. Another question.
Is 7 years enough time to roll out these new technologies? We're talking about digesters, talking about kind of adding different feedstuffs to reduce the methane. It's to roll out from concept to full rollout actually to farmers to reduce the emissions. It seems to me it's a very ambitious target that was set there. There's lots of different things that we mentioned here tonight. But,
I can start off, and Sinead or Ross or Dominique come in. Yeah, listen, that's the fear, I suppose, JP. You know, Frank, our director, has I know stood up at lots of different presentations and kind of mapped out their roadmap, and there's technologies that the likes of what Dominique is talking about, low emission slurry spreading, protected urea, they're off the shelf technologies that we can use now, but we need to see implementation at farm level. There's new technologies that are just around the corner that, you know, the likes of tree knop and things like that are going to come on the market, and other technologies there around, let's say, on the breeding side that are going to help us. And then there's technologies, someone was talking about boluses that might be 4 or 5 years down the road. But the big thing with all of those is that we're going to have the implementation at farm level is going to be more critical than necessarily the technologies that are there or new technologies coming. You know, if we could get 100% or 80% or 70% uptake of all the technologies that are currently available, you know, it gives us that little bit of breathing space over the next couple of years to wait for those other technologies that are coming. So listen, Dominique and Sinead have been more qualified on the new technologies coming.
Yeah, I can come in here. So I suppose right now we have a plan, which is great. So we had the launch of our own Teagasc Climate Action Plan recently, about 2 weeks ago, and that gives us something to focus on. And we basically have technologies that are ready right now from the MAC, which Dominique spoke about earlier, that are ready to go, and these need to be implemented on farm through basically the signpost program, which is helping farmers to implement those technologies on farm. And these are things that would enhance profitability on farm as well. So it's a benefit, a double benefit. There's other technologies that will be ready by 2025, and then others by 2030. So we have a plan, and we're going to stick to it, and we can see the reductions within that plan because these are modelled. So I think we have to all work together, be it at the research level, be at the advisory level, and for uptake on farm to make this work. But we definitely have to turn the tide. We're under legislative, we have to do that now as legislation governing it, and work together to implement those technologies, ones that are ready and ones that are going to come on stream.
Ross, EBI is is the essence of incremental change, incremental improvement. No silver bullets, no big bangs.
No, you're right, and look, it's not going to deliver, you know, radical change in a year or two. It's more progressive, and I suppose that's the downside, but the upside of it is it's permanent and cumulative. So you make genetic improvement in a particular trait, and as long as you keep making it each year and year, you're building it in your herd. But I would say that, yeah, we need the mixture of the short-term stuff, such as maybe the phenotypic age of slaughter, reducing that. The longer term is breeding it into the herd, that animals can genetically get to that required spec and on you know, with a reduced age.
And ultimately the time scale will be whatever the time scale is. Even with the best will in the world, you can only move so fast and everything has to be verified. A question for Dominique.
Want to? Yeah. Sorry, just in relation to the anaerobic digestion, I know that the recent budget there was 3 million delivered for anaerobic digestion in Ireland, and I suppose that's enough to cover the cost of maybe less than 2 significant digesters. What's your view, given that there was somewhere of the order of 43 million available to European countries to apply for funding in this area, and Ireland chose not to apply? We're eligible for 800 million last April, and the current government decided not to apply for that funding. Ourselves and Luxembourg are the only 2 countries, I believe, that actually didn't apply for that funding. Now, I suppose my view, or my concern is, anaerobic digestion is obviously will only work with animal agriculture. Do you think that the current government are against animal agriculture in all forms, and that's why they're not actually promoting that technology, which is something we could be a solution in?
That's an ecumenical matter. Go on, Dominique.
It depends who's in the audience, isn't it? Look, I think it's a very good question, and to be honest with you, I don't have the answer, and I'm scratching my head a little bit of what happened there, that Ireland didn't apply for that funding. And you know, the only thing that comes to my mind is that a lot of those discussions come between 2 departments, one being the Department of Agriculture, the other one being the Department of the Environment and Climate. And that, you know, if that was an internal discussion between them, I really can't comment on that. On the question of whether whether the department is kind of against livestock agriculture, I definitely wouldn't say so, because I think both the government in general and the department sees the value of the sector to the Irish economy. It's absolutely massive. It is the largest indigenous sector of our economy. So while there is a need for certain changes, and as Sinead outlined, it comes from legislation and the situation that we're in, and the global challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss and kind of air pollution. So there's a lot of kind of connected issues together. I don't think you can just discount livestock because thinking that they're causing issues. They're part of a solution as well. And if you look at Ireland, there is a reason why we have livestock agriculture and why our system looks the way it does. So I would say that the departments are very aware of that, and while they want to drive certain changes, it's within what's possible. I always say to people, maybe it's a bit naive, but whenever someone asks about that kind of agriculture that's focused on livestock versus versus kind of tillage, I always say, like, well, you can't pitch them against one another. That's one thing. And 2, if you would like to grow chickpeas in the west of Ireland, I'd pay good money to see that.
I have a conspiracy theory around this tardiness to adopt anaerobic digestion in this country, and I'll share it with anyone that's willing to listen in the bar later. Catherine, will you clear the decks? Any further questions you want to deal with? You're finished. Okay, final wrap up. Let me get comfortable again.
Too comfortable.
Now, Sinead, back to perhaps back to where we began. We're a bit of a practical solution for our grass-based production system in terms of putting a bolus in there or whatever, some kind of a long-term strategy that doesn't involve daily feeding.
We are. So that's really where we have to get to. So at the moment we can have some feed additives that have been very promising indoors. They can reduce methane emissions by around 30%. So I think we'll get there for 2025 for those types of feed additives for the time of the year where animals are indoors. What we really need to put our efforts into from a research perspective is developing slow release feed additives. So bringing those particular feed additives that work well indoors, encapsulating them or putting them into a bolus that they can be released during the day, during long periods of time within animals, so that they are continuously there with the feed and reducing methane emissions. So, and that's actually an international approach as well. We're trying to develop that also in New Zealand. But we've made very good progress here in Ireland in terms of feed additives, and we can get some into pellets now or into concentrate feed. But we just need to go that bit further. So that's where the funding should go in terms of research, and where we can also then down the line demonstrate those feed additives on, say, the demo farms as part of the signpost farms. That's where we'll see the research going. So working hand in hand with the advisory service and the signpost programme.
But it's doable, yes.
I think we'd have to work hard. I think it's doable. We better be, glass half full than glass empty, so half empty. So we just need to, I suppose, put funding into that and and put our efforts into that, and maybe work with industry, and biochemists, etc., to develop encapsulated forms or put them into boluses where they are slow released. So it's not just from, say, our own type of background, but collaborate with universities, which we are actually doing as part of some of our projects to try and help us with that part of it.
Ross, briefly, EBI is outmoded. SBI, Sustainable Breeding Index, is really what we're at now.
Yeah, you're right. And look, we have to move to there on the beef, and we're heading that direction. And we will see that as these indexes mature, you're going to see more and more traits in there. So if you look at the EBI 20 years ago, there was probably a milk trait and a single fertility trait. There's probably upwards on 18 or 19 traits in there now, and we'll see the beef as we get more and more traits evolving that we'll move that direction. And right now the big focus is on carbon and try to get that indicative measure of methane that we can actually put in and put some direct selection on the trait, but not lose sight of the fact that we need an economic solution as well. So we need to keep pushing the both economically too with the indexes.
Yeah, back to Frank's point, it's a three-legged stool, economic, environmental, social, and you can't have any one without the others, or the whole system will fall down. Dominica, just briefly reflect internationally, is everyone pursuing the same goals, or are there other radical alternatives out there?
To be honest with you, Matt, especially within Europe, and for example, New Zealand, so kind of other grass-based systems, I don't think we're an outlier in that way. I think there's a common kind of suite of solutions that we're all trying to go in a similar direction. And while some particular mitigation measures might be slightly different for different countries, what I'm seeing over the last number of years is it is a consistent direction of travel between different countries. So in terms of mitigation for ammonia, for greenhouse gases, what we see in Ireland now, that's what's coming on stream internationally as well. Things like low emission slurry spreading, which in other European countries is like Netherlands and Denmark, kind of much more advanced. But protected urea as well, or kind of just fertiliser formulation and nitrogen use efficiency, and the better, kind of more efficient use of fertilisers, that's there as well. Breeding better animals, and animal health, and kind of soil fertility, mixed species, and kind of grassland management. That's all these are kind of the common themes that I'm seeing. Whenever I talk to colleagues in other countries, and kind of any literature we see. That's kind of that's consistent.
Peers, farmers, advisors, researchers, Teagasc, we're all pioneers at this stage. We're engaging in a pioneering process. How is the pioneers' progress?
Yeah, listen, I go back to what I said at the start there, Matt, seeing is believing, and we had Shane up and Martin up here earlier on, and Trevor who shared the first session. They're all demonstration farms. They're not up in Grange or over in the east of the country, and they're Shane and Martin are in Roscommon, Trevor's in Sligo. They're demonstration farms. We're going to be holding open days, farm walk, discussion group days on those farms. We've updates on the website coming in terms of the progress. I'd say if you get an opportunity to go out to a future beef or a dairy beef demonstration farm in the next 12 months, get out there, get to see them, see what's happening. You go down to Shane's farm. He didn't say it here this evening, but he's farming suckler cows since 2014. He's 37 cows. Every one of those 37 cows calved at 2 years of age. You go down to Kildalton, they have a 50 cow herd. Every one of those cows calved at 2 years of age. So you go in, you look at the cows, you think they're going to be small cows because of it and all the worries, and talk to Shane and talk to different demonstration farmers. See the cows, meet the farmer, see what's happening on the farm, see the swards that are being grown with protected urea and low emission slurry spreading. Talk to the farmers, get their experience. Because at the end of the day, it's about seeing is believing. And it's fine, as I said, for us to put it in a newsletter or write it in an article. Get out, talk to those farmers, meet them, hear what worked and what didn't work. Nicky was talking earlier there about red clover, and it's great to see a slide that showed the pros but also the cons. And people do have worries about new technology. And from talking to those demonstration farmers and talking to other farmers in discussion groups, you get to kind of assuage some of those fears. Or you may decide the technology is not for you, or you're going to do it slightly different on your farm because of some of the concerns maybe that you have for that technology.
Pierce, Dominica, Ross, Sinead, I share in your thanks to our panel tonight for the discussion, and I have to honestly admit, I chaired a section last year online. This is much better as far as I'm concerned. Thank you very much. Stay with me for a moment. Pat Dillon, Director of Research at Teagasc, will conclude proceedings.
I'm not going to keep you very long. I thought with a great conference. I would say it was kind of split in two. What we were talking about in the first session was the bread and butter issues, which will improve sustainability and improve profitability. And they're the actions that we need to do work on immediately. And then we were talking about the longer strategies in terms of biomethane, the microbes, what we can do in terms of genetics long term. So, the Food Vision beef document was published a couple of weeks ago, and if we look at it, the discussion tonight was really addressing all the main issues in that. And look at the age of slaughter, the age of first calving, the fat score of the slaughter animals, and then the other two, the protected urea and the low emission slurry. All technologies that we can adapt tomorrow morning, all will comply with improving the environmental sustainability of our systems. But also really important, what most farmers are here today are talking about, is they're improving the profitability of their systems as well. So there's really opportunities there, both to increase the profitability. And we had the Teagasc produced their economic forecast for 2023 there today, and they say that beef prices next year are going to be higher than this year. And this year is not a bad beef price. So we're starting off from a good base in terms of beef price, and how do we capitalise on that in terms of making more profit. And the man over there talked about the infrastructure. Infrastructure comes with better profitability and regenerating your system. So I'm not going to go on anymore. I just want to thank a few people. I want to thank all our contributors to the discussion. It was really good, and I think it was really, really good. Our two chairpersons, Trevor and Matt, really thank you very much for your contribution. And lastly, to the people that organised it, and the three main people, I would say, are Pierce, Paul Crossan and Pat Clark here in front of me. And well done to the Teagasc, and well done. And lastly, I'll say, have a happy Christmas. We're close to Christmas, and a happy New Year, and we're ready to face all those new technologies, adoptions in the new year. And you get every support from Teagasc. So, there is, and I think we had a really good conference. So I'll leave it at that. So thanks, everyone.